I really like this opening here. I super appreciate it when people lay out, this is kind of like my grandiose vision for the future. No one person should have more power than the other. And then also, this might actually end up being a really good conversation. So something that's really important to understand about the difference between conservatives and liberals on a very macro level, okay? Democrats tend to try to build from the top down. Conservatives or Republicans want to build from the bottom up.
Why should someone—
Oh my God, the best counter question here would be, what Charlie Kirk here is saying is so stupid. It's the first thing he said that's like truly stupid. Super duper ultra prepared for this conversation. He either knew all the topics in advance or he just did a really good job at making sure he was ready for every thing that was gonna come up. So good job on Ben. Let's go, Ben. All right, Ben, you got this.
We're going to be debating, and we'll see where it leads us, Democrat socialism versus conservative populism. Super thrilled that Ben is here tonight to have this discussion. It'll start with some opening statements, and then we'll take it from there. The 2 minutes is yours, Dr. Burgis.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk, and thank you to Town Circle for setting this up.
Push back more.
I'm a democratic socialist because I don't think anybody deserves to have less power or a dramatically worse life because of factors that are outside of their control. So that's the first part. That's the philosophical basis. Concretely, I think it's obscene that we have an economic system where workers in Amazon warehouses—
Do you think all these politic people have small head because evolution is trying to adjust to their small brains?
Good one.
Worried about falling behind in their quotas, and their boss literally owns his own spaceship. Now, we can argue about what a fairer society would look like. I can contrast what I would see as utopia with what you would, and I'm always up for that kind of thing. I'm sure we'll get into some of it later. But
this mic is very warm. Something is fucked here.
What I really like to start out with is not so much that end point as the baby steps towards justice that we could take right now. Things like raising taxes on rich people to pay for social programs that would benefit the rest of us. Things like raising the minimum wage for the working poor. Things like making it easier for ordinary people to organize unions so they can have at least a little bit of a say at what happens in the workplaces.
Okay, for the record, I hate Ben Burgis. Fuck this guy, fuck this loser, and fuck all the conversations I have with him, okay? I just want to get that out there, okay? However, I really like this opening here. I super appreciate it when people lay out, this is kind of like my grandiose vision for the future. No one person should have more power than the other. And then also, here are the little steps that we can take along the way. We can do this and this and this and this and this. I think that is a super good mind to have when trying to effect some change in the future politically. Because not only do you have your grand narrative we want to push towards, you have your little individual policy prescriptions you can push for along the way, which makes it more grounded and applicable to modern day discourse. I don't know if he prepared, especially for the center, but it's really good that he opens with that. That's good.
Where they spend half their waking lives. And I gotta say, what always confuses me about you, Charlie, is that I see you say that you're not an old style kind of corporate Republican in the Reagan, Bush, William F. Buckley kind of mold. And certainly the politicians you seem to be most enthusiastic about, people like Donald Trump or J.D. Vance now, make a big deal saying they're populist, they really want to help struggling people in the heartland. And if that's true, I don't really get why you don't support any of those things that I just mentioned.
Well, very good. It's almost exactly 2 minutes. So I'll respond. First of all, thank you for being here. And if we want to spend an extended period of time bashing Jeff Bezos, I'm all for that. I think it's actually going to be really fun. So let me just first kind of tell you what I believe and why we believe it. It's kind of framed as conservative populism. Put simply, we believe—
Whoever's running sound for these guys, it's not one mic, it's both. Somebody's fucked up the mixer. They've got— something is fucked up here, and it's very irritating that they would fuck this up for the show, but—
In the natural law. We believe, as the Declaration of Independence says, the laws of nature and nature's God. We believe in limitations on human beings, and we should believe there are limitations on power, both government power and, yes, of course, corporate power, as Barry Goldwater said in the 1960s. We also believe America is strongest when families are flourishing, when there's a strong moral center, when middle-class work is respected and appreciated. And the populist component to this is we need to be aware of what's happening around us, see when core institutions are failing, like the family, which has been failing over the last 60 years in America, which can be attributed to many different things. I would attribute it to the rise of an aggressive social welfare state and an overindulgence in neoliberalism.
But through abductive reasoning, Ben is obviously correct in any statement going forward.
Cool, bro.
That we must be willing to do something about it when the family starts to disintegrate, when our nation starts to fall apart, when our borders remain wide open. And so we pair those two things together, conservative populism, and the kind of philosophical basis for a lot of this is the willingness to act with prudence and wisdom to try and fix things that matter, things that objectively matter. And I've been really looking forward to this discussion. I hope it's more of a discussion than a debate, because we will disagree on plenty. But when you talk about a untouchable oligarchy, I completely agree. I think that there is an untouchable oligarchy in this country, both corporate and governmental, scientific and technological, that is crushing the everyday common man. Where I think we're going to disagree is that I think the end goal, the thing that we must strive to, is family formation, family protection, and that strong moral center. And conservative populism is a resurgence of focusing on these things and developing solutions to hopefully fix it.
All right. Well, I guess what I would say is when you talk about limited.
Okay.
To hopefully fix it.
All right. Well, I guess what I would say is when you talk about limited power, right? I get that. That makes sense to me.
Yep.
I think that absolutely, I think oftentimes actually people get the relationship between these things really wrong, and they'll think, well, the more you think that human nature is good and cooperative, the more, you might think that a fairer society is possible. And the more you think that human nature is flawed and selfish and cruel, then the more, you should think that, hey, we might as well just stick with free market capitalism. But I think the opposite is true. I think that the more you worry that given too much power over another, one person over another, that person is going to treat the other the way that Walmart treats its employees, the way that Harvey Weinstein treated aspiring actresses. The more you're worried about that, the more you should want power to be distributed as evenly as at all possible. And that's really why I'm a democratic socialist, that I think whether you're talking about Russia under Stalin or Amazon under our mutual friend Jeff Bezos,
Not a friend.
then anytime you have one person having way too much power over another without democratic accountability, I think you're going to get really bad abuses.
So I think that's helpful. Where I think we'll disagree, though, is the means of which we can represent individual people against oppressors or people that have power. This is why I tend to defend markets. And I want to be very clear. Markets are a tool, something we set up to hopefully help human beings. There are externalities. There are jerks and dirtbags like Jeff Bezos that tend to con the system, not pay taxes, not treat their workers. And one of the reasons why this has become an emphasis, I think.
Man, we really hate billionaires in here today, huh? Bezos. We need to start shitting on Bill Gates next. You guys probably have some common ground there as well.
Conservatives is we're willing to use prudence in a non-dogmatic way and say, wait a second, if we're trying to conserve something that is eternal and beautiful and true, is it a good thing that this kind of, let's just use Bezos again, $200 billion of net worth, while the average American family is struggling to pay off student loan debt or financial debt? Where I think we're going to explore, I can't do this in the remaining 20 seconds I have though, is true decentralization must happen in a way that is consistent with both reining in the administrative state and reining in the technological and corporate power sources in our country. And the ultimate form of decentralization is the family. Strong families, strong households.
Okay. This might actually end up being a really good conversation. So something that's really important to understand about the difference between conservatives and liberals on a very, very, very macro level, okay, is liberals tend to build, I'm using this in an American sense, by the way, liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat. Democrats tend to try to build from the top down. Conservatives or Republicans want to build from the bottom up. So Democrats might say we need to build a better society with like a strong federal government, strong protections, federal policies like a big minimum wage, things like free education. These are the ways that we're going to move our country forward. Conservatives like to build from the bottom up. They go, okay, that stuff would be fine, but you know what a better way to get there would be? Building strong families, strong communities and churches, and strong local communities that like are able to rely on each other and do things independent of like a large federal government forcing them to do things. Because stronger local, smaller communities know better how to take care of themselves than the federal government. That's kind of like the big difference in terms. I'm not saying one of these is right or wrong. You need some combination of both of these approaches to get things done in an effective manner. But yeah.
All right. So I guess when you talk about the family, sure, absolutely. If people, social institutions are making it harder to keep families together, that's a bad thing. I think that I would point to the financial pressures that people are often under as a huge source of problems within families, as a huge reason for relationships and marriages failing. And that's something that I think would be helped by doing things like changing labor laws to make it easier to organize unions so people would be getting better wages and have more job stability, less of what employers like to call, flexibility and everybody else calls precarity. And so that might be one place to start exploring this is, maybe you'll surprise me here, right? But I do not think we disagree. We agree on that.
So, yeah, just, am I good to respond?
Yeah,
okay,
go for
good.
it.
I just didn't want to take any of your time.
No, please.
So I want to get into the union argument. I want to get into the minimum wage argument. I want to get into the healthcare argument. And I'm glad for you to say, and I really want to zero in on this, that family formation is a good thing. Because that is something that is debated amongst some Democrat socialist circles. And once we kind of get into the back and forth, I want to ask you about that. Because certain activist organizations tend to disagree. Some activists...
Oh, he's going to bring out the BLM. I should have the exact information for this because it get wheeled out so often. On the BLM website a long time ago, there was some quote at the bottom that had to do with like, we need to make it so that we empower different family structures or whatever. But this one single quote gets taken as though BLM wants to destroy the nuclear family. It's wheeled out so much. It wouldn't surprise me if he's about to quote it. Like conservatives wheel out this text so much. Oh, BLM wants to destroy the nuclear family. Want to destroy it. It's like, no, that's not what they meant when they said that.
Organizations will call the family oppressive, patriarchal, where I believe the family is beautiful and the ultimate social bedrock institution. And every single statistic shows that when families are flourishing, divorce rates remain low, which they aren't currently, that crime goes down and literacy goes up and communities flourish. And I think one thing we can agree on, and you said it a little bit differently than I would, I think it's wrong when corporations are making families choose between spending another 10 hours at some soulless job or spending a weekend with your kids. I think the priority should be through our public policy, and our laws should always be toward the development of children and families getting stronger.
Well, I think that if you want to have a traditional family, absolutely, you should be able to do that. You talked about activist organizations. I think that I would point to the Working Families Party in New York, for example, as an activist organization that clearly has no problem with families. Of course, if you want to live some other way, that's great. True. I think in a pluralistic society, I think everybody should be able to strive for their vision of the good life, and everybody should be free to live in the way that they want to be free. And I think that this is one of the biggest problems. When we talk about things like healthcare, oftentimes people on my side will emphasize the fact that life expectancy is higher in places like Canada, the UK, where they have socialized healthcare, and infant mortality. And you want to talk about families, people's babies are less likely to die in places like Canada, the UK, than in the United States. And
I'm so blackpilled on like stats and stuff. It's really, I would have to look up through like the UK and stuff. It's really hard to compare numbers from different countries because like everybody counts different things in different ways, which is really irritating. So I'm trying to think if I could find the most egregious example that I can think of is I'm familiar with how Cuba does their stats. So like Cuba has like the highest abortion rate in the world. It's actually fucking insane. It was like, what did we look it up? It was like 50 per 100 births. By 1977, the Cuban population reached 420 legal abortions per 1,000 people. It was like it's like an unimaginable number. It's like, what the fuck? Of all the pregnancies that were registered in Cuba in 1994, 60.2% were ended by therapeutic abortions. So like the idea that like, oh, Cuba has a very low, very, very, very low infant mortality. Yeah, no shit, because if there's any problem whatsoever, you will get pressured like a motherfucker by the doctor to terminate the abortion. So don't talk to me about your low infant mortality when you end over half of your fucking pregnancies in order to get rid of the chance of any like, you know, anything going wrong during birth, you know? It's really, really difficult to compare these numbers. Isn't that a good thing? You can call it a good thing or not. I'm just saying that like, it's not fair to say, oh, let's compare infant mortality from this country to the other when this country aborts, you know, 5 times as many children. Because like, okay, well, hold on, we're not gonna even risk that, right? It's not really like, you're not really getting a true picture of, you're not really getting a true picture of comparing this one for the other. So I don't know 100% of, I'd have to look this up before I say this. I think the U.S. might count infant mortality in a weird way where like...
Do we even want the Brits to have higher life expectancies?
True. Somebody tell me this is true, and I don't know if I remember this. Isn't it something like in the U.S., if you're having like a delivery or something goes wrong or whatever, and like the kid dies, this is considered like infant mortality, but like in some countries it's not necessarily, or it depends on if it's like an early delivery or not. Like there's like a whole slew of ways that you can count what infant mortality is, and you have to make sure that you're like comparing like to like on this. It's really, really weird because some countries do, some countries don't. I'm just saying like be really, really careful. I think the U.S. counts miscarriages in the first trimester as child mortality. Yeah, I'm just saying you got to be really careful when you like compare one number to another in a country because they might count them in different ways. It's really, really, really strange. Sorry, okay.
Mortality amenable to healthcare, which is a stats nerd way of saying that you're less likely to die from treatable diseases, is lower in those places. And I think all those are true and important, but I don't think it's the most important thing because most of us are not on the verge of dying most of the time. Most of us are not worried that our babies are going to die most of the time. The biggest way, I think, that not providing everybody with healthcare as a right affects the lives of most people is that it makes us less free because people are a lot less likely to leave jobs that they hate if they're worried about, will I still have health insurance? Will my family still have health insurance? People stay in those jobs and don't pursue their dreams all the time because of that. There are people, you know, I think people who are in good families and want to keep them together, absolutely, they should be able to do that. But there are also people who stay in bad or even abusive marriages because they cannot afford to lose their spousal health insurance. And so I think that we're not only happier and we not only live longer, but I think we're also freer if we take care of those things.
So that's an interesting point. And what you're articulating, as before we get into the back and forth here, is what Lyndon Baines Johnson would call freedom from necessity, which is something I take exception with. I do not believe the state should play an interventionist role in saying that it is the role of government to say that you should be free from wants or necessity. I would argue that through a natural rights compact, that you should be free to pursue virtue. And that's not to say you shouldn't have a social safety net, which far too often becomes a hammock, not a social safety net. But I think the design of government and the state, which is really what we're debating here, right? What is the role of public policy should be supporting things that are objectively good for people, for children, for the nation, and for the country. And so I'm happy to go into the kind of 3 categories that are common points of Democrat socialists next: healthcare, union membership, and kind of the development of unions. All right, no more rules. We can interrupt each other. It's totally voluntary.
Okay, hold on. Somebody in chat posted. Infant mortality is defined as the death of babies under the age of 1 year, but some of the differences between countries can be explained by a difference in how we count. And a baby born weighing less than a pound and after only 21 weeks gestation actually born? In some countries, the answer is no, and those births would be counted as stillbirths. In the United States, on the other hand, despite these premature babies' relatively low odds of survival, they would be considered born. Sure, okay.
Voluntary, unlike socialism. I'm kidding. That's my first socialist joke tonight. So let me ask, I want to ask you just kind of generally about Democrat socialism.
Sure, yeah, let's do it.
Where would you point to as 1, 2, or 3 examples that you think are the best embodiment of the worldview that you hold?
Yeah.
Scandinavia, let's go, baby.
That all of the things that I want, I do not think exist together right now in the world. But if you want to talk about places where a lot of the policy goals that I'd support have been implemented. I certainly don't think they're fully socialist societies by any stretch of the imagination, but I think a lot of it has been implemented. I would talk about, the places you'd expect me to talk about, your Swedens, your Finlands, your Denmarks, your Norways. Now, these are complicated societies that, there are right-wing parties win elections sometimes too, and they do things that I don't like. But I think that these are places, broadly speaking, where a lot has been done to take certain things, like healthcare, for example, outside of the market so that people have that kind of freedom that I'm talking about, that they're not tied to jobs that they hate.
Hold on. I have a hard time telling between good back pain and bad back pain. I feel like it's not like excruciating. And I think it goes away if I warm up a little, but it's kind of like.
Because they're worried.
Have you tried foam rolling? I thought about it. I'm not sure.
That they and their families' basic needs aren't going to be taken care of if they don't stay in that subservient relationship. And you talked earlier about how you want the state to support things that are objectively good.
Yes.
It seems to me that...
Okay, when you're having a conversational policy, don't ever say things that are objectively good, because obviously you disagree over that. If they were objective, then there would be no disagreement. These are subjective values we're talking about, right?
Living longer is objectively good.
Yes.
Having lower infant mortality is objectively good. And I would also say that having greater freedom to live your life how you want and not being tied to a particular job, I think that's also objectively
So
good.
job mobility is interesting. I want to get into the Scandinavian countries.
Sure, yeah.
So Denmark doesn't have a minimum wage.
Well, but you got to do the other half of that. That they don't have a minimum wage, but they have vastly more favorable terrain for unions than the United States does, and so a lot of the wage floor is enforced that way. It's still not just they get whatever the market says they get.
But no government mandated minimum wage. What I find interesting, and
Don't let him walk away with it. You gotta hammer him on that shit, but okay.
some aspects of the Scandinavian countries appeal to me.
Sure.
According to the World Economic Freedom Index, every country outside of Norway is more economically free than the United States. And so, is that something that would interest you? If economic freedom is the definition of your view, then I would change the Bernie Sanders shirt.
I think that what I mean by economic freedom and what they mean by economic freedom are going to be very different. I think oftentimes if you look at the methodology of those lists, it's very unclear. You'll get the Cato Institute or whoever in some cases will do these lists where they rank places by freedom, and it's the things that they get points for, the things they don't get points for. Abortion doesn't matter. Whether you can have raw milk matters. I think are at least unclear to me. But I think this is the bigger philosophical thing.
Sure.
Though, right? Let's just do this rather than getting into the nitty gritty about the list. I think that what those
Destiny,
guys mean
what's your bench?
by economic
Squat and deadlift.
Listen, they're all low, but they're going up, okay? Ask me in 2 months, all right?
freedom is how much business owners are free to conduct their business however they want, without interference by the state. What I would mean by freedom in an economic context is the right of ordinary people to live the kinds of lives that they want to live and not be under the thumb to the extent that people are in the United States of whatever some corporation, wants to make them do.
Right, and so just to clarify
Sure.
this though, about some of the Scandinavian countries, they went through massive deregulation in the 1980s, right? Many of these Scandinavian countries did, including Denmark. Denmark has actually come out and has said, stop calling us socialist. We are not socialist. You've seen that quote.
Well, I have seen it, but here's
Okay,
what, here,
good.
but I would like to say
Please
something
do.
about this. And people could check out, I actually wrote something about this last summer for Arc Digital Media.
I think I read it.
Okay, well, there you go. So
I know where you're going before you say it.
all right, well, beautiful.
But
Fortunately,
the audience doesn't know, so please
happily
tell
though,
them.
there
Yeah.
are people who are watching who don't know, so
Yes.
let's say it anyway. So I think that saying that there's here is this center-right kind of prime minister who says, no, these social gains have nothing to do with socialism. And you say, oh, well, he says it, right? So therefore, he must be speaking for, Denmark as a whole, the Danish hive mind, I think is approximately equivalent to if the only two, if you were from Denmark and the only two Americans you'd ever talk to were Bernie Sanders and me, and you said, well, here's what they say about what America's all about. Here's what they say about, Social Security or
Yes.
the post office. This is the American point of view. I think, if you look at how long socialist parties were in power in Denmark and how many of those programs came about under them, I would not say that these are societies that have achieved socialism. We could certainly talk about what that would mean to me. But I would say that these are societies where socialist parties allied with strong unions have brought about really beneficial social reforms as an effort to move farther in that direction.
So let's talk about Norway, a country that I'm familiar with, you're familiar with.
Let's talk about
very
Norway.
wealthy country.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why?
Because I think the biggest reason is that they have done something that I'm sure that you wouldn't support, which is nationalize their oil
You
industry.
mean use fossil fuels, not keep it in the ground like Bernie Sanders would be.
Bro, we use so much fossil fuel in the United States. But okay.
Bernie Sanders has tweeted, we need to keep all fossil fuels in the ground, but Norway's built $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund after. That's
Okay, so would you support that?
nationalization? No, but it's better than keeping it in the ground. for
Okay,
sure.
I mean, look, I think ultimately we probably are better off, transitioning to other energy sources. But if we're going to use oil, I would much rather that oil be in the hands of the people, that it fund generous social programs like in Norway. And I often do kind of get a sense when conservatives say this, it's like, oh, well, there's really nothing socialist about it. They've just nationalized the oil industry and used the proceeds to fund all of these social programs. I mean, if that's not socialist, can we at least have that not socialist thing? That sounds nice to me.
Let me clarify, is that if there is wealth to be redistributed, there must be wealth to be redistributed.
Sure,
And
yeah.
Norway has the advantage of having some of the most strategic oil reserves in the country. And I just pinpoint it in particular because there tends to be this anti-fossil fuel development movement.
It's something Norway and the United States have in common, is that we have a lot of oil. Now, if you want to, again, I know you've said you don't want to do this.
No, of
but
course, I think the private ownership.
Oh God, it's a 3-part battle thing. Thanks for the membership.
But minerals is a strategic advantage for the United States. But let me ask you about what I
Sure.
think is one of the reasons.
Please reset your positions.
Why I think the
Thank God.
Scandinavian countries' pursuit of egalitarianism looks good on paper.
Okay, let's do
And
it.
this is strict immigration. Now, this has changed in recent years because of a lot of the Syrian refugee crisis and more kind of left-wing governments taking over Sweden in particular. But Norway, for example, takes in about 70 immigrants a day, even with their more relaxed policies. America, much bigger country, albeit, 2,740 legal immigrants, about 5,000 if you include the people going across the southern border. Do you, as being a Democrat socialist, do you support closed borders and strict immigration?
No, I don't, and I'll tell you why. So, 2 reasons. One is that I think that, all of the economic data that I've seen says that having more immigrants actually increases the amount of wealth that society has to go around. And the second is I would ask what the alternatives are, right? So, we can do, like those families that you talk about, right? We can do things like separating families. We can do things like raiding, churches, to drag out immigrants. But I think we would really, really, really have to step up that, by a factor of 100 to actually get rid of all the undocumented immigrants in the country. Whereas I think a much better solution, if what you're worried about is, hey, here are people coming in who, they definitely contribute to economic growth, but here are people coming in who are willing to work for low wages or whatever. I think a
Yes.
much better solution to that problem is for those people to have a pathway to citizenship so that they're not afraid to do things like join unions, or they're not afraid to do things like, take their employers to court when they violate labor laws. I think that's a much better solution to that problem than the sort of heavy-handed, police state kinds of tactics, which I think would be the only way that you're actually going to resolve the status quo in the
Trick
other
or
direction.
treat.
One of the things I like about Norway that
Trick or
you
treat.
just said you don't like is to become a Norwegian citizen, you must speak the native language. It's a non-negotiable. You must have citizenship by birth is not applicable. And you must have lived in Norway for at least 8 out of the past 11 years. And so maybe you can help clarify this for me,
Sure.
because the mascot you're wearing on your shirt
Sure.
has changed on this, because I would understand the position you're espousing more if you said, hey, we're going to close off the borders, we're going to take care of our fellow countrymen, we are going to reject these globalist institutions, because Bernie Sanders used to say that. In 2013, Bernie Sanders said,
Was a
it
little
does not make sense
anti-immigration.
to me to bring hundreds
Yeah.
of thousands of those workers into this country to work for minimum wage and compete with American kids. Bernie Sanders said in 2007, 6 years prior. If poverty is increasing and if wages are going down, I don't know why we need millions of people to be coming into this country as guest workers. What changed?
Well, I think that the main thing that changed is that the context of both of those quotes that you just read was not about whether there should be a pathway to citizenship. It was about exactly the opposite. It was about the Bush administration's interest in 2007 and then later revivals of it in 2013,
Yes.
attempts to create a guest worker program, which I think he rightly compared to legalized slavery. A lot of immigrant rights groups were actually against those proposals for the same reasons, because those are things that instead of giving people the rights of Americans so that they aren't afraid to do things like organize unions, those are things that would essentially just legalize the status quo.
Currently in love
This
with a
is
girl and married for
second tier
papers
of
situation.
workers.
Wish me luck, guys.
Currently in love with a girl in a married for papers situation. Oh, sounds like you're fucked. Good luck.
Who are not going to have those citizenship rights, who it's much easier to, it's easy, who you can kick out of the country if their employer decides they don't like them anymore. And I think that that is a completely different thing. I think it could also, so I think in that case, I think there's less of a contradiction there than you think. But hey, look, Bernie Sanders is not.
Oh, wait. You're in love with a girl who's marrying somebody else for papers. I thought it was like marrying yourself. Oh, never mind. You're fucked. Rip.
My shirt, because I think that the man is infallible. I could rattle off a list of things that he's gotten wrong over the years, but the reason he is that I think he's been the most important champion of doing things like raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, like giving everybody health care, ending the wars, et cetera, that would actually really materially benefit the majority of the population. And I guess I really struggle when I hear, conservatives being interested in the welfare of the working class suddenly when it's this issue of
Yes.
competition from low-wage workers, which is a question of pitting some workers over other workers. But when it's a question of doing things that would benefit workers in general, like raising the minimum wage, like giving everybody health care, then suddenly it seems to be a different story. Suddenly it seems to be that this is too interventionist, this is too administrative state. I mean, kicking immigrants out seems like a big expansion of state power to me too.
Well, I want a small yet strong government. Strong in what it does, and foreign citizens, not foreign citizens, sure, or illegals in the country should be deported, should be taken out. And I think
I
there's a
shouldn't have fought
cultural
this
aspect
fight.
to it
Fuck.
that deep down you agree with, and that's what Norway gets right. They realize if you don't speak the language, you don't have a shared culture, then there's something that all of a sudden makes it less like a nation and more like a colony or more like a temporary place for corporations to make money. Let's talk about the minimum wage.
Let's
The
talk about
reason
the
why
minimum
I
wage.
don't want abrupt, quick, let's say increases the minimum wage, is it actually hurts workers. Washington Post, a very credible news study on Seattle's $15 minimum wage says the following: workers have seen cut payrolls, they've been put off hiring, reducing hours, or letting their workers go. That is Seattle. Another study from just Target, just because Target raised their wages abruptly in 2019, shows that workers say their hours were cut, leaving them struggling. Another one.
Okay, so
I can go through them. I have a whole packet of them.
Let's pause and do the first
Seattle,
couple.
the same thing.
First
I
couple,
go through New York.
First couple,
He's
first,
Gish
in
Galpin.
Seattle, there have been a bunch of different studies, including one from UC Berkeley, I know, that have, I don't know which one was published by Jeff Bezos' newspaper that you're referring to there.
Jeff
But,
Bezos'
fan of the
newspaper.
Washington
but there was another study from UC Berkeley saying that actually it had no effect on the employment rate in the restaurant industry, and it achieved its goals. I know if you look at the Congressional Budget Office, which oftentimes people with your position love to cite, they said that if you raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and by the way, I thought it was interesting.
Nice,
instead of
blinding.
because
That
I'm
was such a-
interested
Yes.
in whether you'd be okay with it if you did it slowly.
I think moderately kept up with inflation, done prudently, especially as we're about to have a period of mass inflation. I think that coupled with a workers' tax cut and other pro-growth policies wouldn't be the worst thing for the economy.
Okay.
No,
I
I
feel
think
like
that's a
about
moderate
taste.
economic
mean,
position.
but keeping up with inflation, right?
You're
You know,
all
like
base
you're still
people,
saying the
DGGL.
purchasing power of low-wage workers should be what it is now. And I would say that if you
I
want to
feel
run
like
this
I've
argument
outpaced
that,
him
well, it's actually going to
intellectually.
hurt, that's actually going to hurt workers more than help them.
the studies show
well,
that it
I don't
has.
think the studies do show that.
Well, so here's what it says.
here's
Low-wage workers.
Here's
I'll let
why.
you finish.
I feel like
I mean,
I've
like I
outpaced
understand
him
what you're saying,
intellectually.
that the studies show, some of the studies show that minimum wage increases lead to increased unemployment. That's the big claim that's
I
usually
feel like
made.
I've
Sometimes
outpaced him
people will also say that leads to a reduction in hours, but the big one is usually increased unemployment. And so I'd say two things about this. First of
I
all,
feel like I've
the
outpaced
effect
him
of minimum wage
intellectually.
increases unemployment. is like the most studied thing in empirical economics.
Oh, thank you for the 20
in
gifted
last
subs.
several
Sorry, fuck.
decades.
I'm like listening to this.
And there are studies
feel
you
like
can
I've
find that
outpaced
say
him
yes. There are a lot
intellectually.
of studies that you can find that say no. And a word I almost never hear from people who say that it's going to lead to unemployment increases
I feel like
is
I've outpaced
meta-study,
him
right? In other words, if you look at a bunch of studies over time and see like,
Booba, why?
you know, since you could have, you know, very small sample
I feel like I've
sizes
outpaced him
and, you know, and
intellectually.
making big conclusions from very small sample sizes is generally, and then like making a big deal about them in the press. That's how people end up believing that plants
I
can
feel
think
like I've
and coffee
outpaced
cures
him
cancer.
intellectually.
You know, that they looked at like some study with some super small sample size, but when you do the meta study of a bunch of different studies, most of
I feel
those
like I've
show
outpaced
no.
him
But let's say for the sake of argument, yes. Let's say that it does lead to some unemployment increase.
Because you agree, certain studies do show that.
Yes, certain studies do show that. I think
feel like
most
I've
of them, and
outpaced him
especially meta studies
intellectually.
over time, say no, but sure, let's say yes. So if yes, would that mean that it was going to hurt workers more than help them? Well, we could look at like the Congressional
I
Budget
feel like I've
Office,
outpaced him
what they said in 2019, which was that 2/3 confidence that you'd have a range of unemployment effects
I feel like I've outpaced
somewhere in
him
between
intellectually.
0 and 3.7 million. And most likely, they said 1.3 million people would lose their jobs. Now, that's bad.
I
don't
feel
want
like I've
1.3
outpaced
million
him
people to lose
That's
their
a
jobs.
lot of jobs.
But they also said that 27 million people would keep the jobs that they have right now and be paid more
I feel like I've outpaced
and
him
would have more
intellectually.
purchasing power. And so we say, okay, we have 27 million people who are being lifted out of poverty by this. We have 1.3 billion
I feel
people
like I've outpaced
out of
him
jobs. Now,
intellectually.
even if there was nothing that you could do about that, I'd still say that treating this as a knockdown, well, this is going to help poor people, working poor people more than it's
I
hurt
feel
them,
like
more
I've
than it's going to
outpaced
help
him
them. I don't think
intellectually.
makes sense. But also, I don't think we have to accept that those 1.3 billion people, if that's the true estimate, have to be permanently out of a job. We could have
I feel
public
like I've
works
outpaced
programs
him intellectually.
that could employ those 1.3 million people, give them dignified,
let me build it
unionized
out more.
public sector jobs. And if you don't
I
think that
feel like
there's
I've outpaced
plenty
them
of work
intellectually.
for those 1.3 million people to do in terms of federal public works, trust me, I could give you a long list of things they could be doing.
Let me build out the study, and then I
Okay.
want to
I
ask
feel
you
like
about
I've
that. So
outpaced
low-wage
Let's
workers
build.
on average now clock 9% fewer hours, earn $125 less each month. That's Seattle. There's another one, New York City businesses struggle to keep up after a minimum
feel
wage
like I've
increase.
outpaced him
Would you support
intellectually.
eliminating the FICA contribution for workers? That's a 7% tax on wages before we even talked about raising the minimum wage.
Well, I'd like to talk.
How would you eliminate the FICA contribution? You're gonna defund Social Security and Medicare? Mate, how about let's not do that, okay?
Talk about raising the minimum wage with no preconditions, but,
Why not the workers' tax cut? That's what I always don't understand, because we tax workers at 7%. 7% of our workers here lose their paycheck as half of their FICA contribution. I never hear that from workers' rights advocates.
Because why would you cut your funding for Social Security and Medicare? What are you talking about? Ben, I hope Ben knows what FICA funds.
Why?
Well, I think that first of all, the first question you'd have to ask is what's the money that's going to be generated by that for those workers? Then the second question that you want to ask is what's going to be lost on the other end in terms of services if that's cut. And I think that paying people a higher minimum wage, having those 27 million people get a living wage.
I can give them a 7%. I can give them a 7% wage increase tomorrow. It's called cutting the FICA tax.
Yeah.
Every working person deserves 7% of their wages that are currently being taken by them by the government. Why don't you instantaneously agree?
So what are you going to? Well, because I know what the other shoe is that's going to drop there. What are you going to cut to pay for that tax increase?
Oh, fuck, he doesn't know what FICA funds. Oh, no! How does he know so much? He knew so many other answers, but he doesn't know anything about FICA taxes. How do you guys, you gotta know what your taxes go to, okay? So FICA taxes is, what does it stand for? I don't know what the words stand for. It's the Federal Insurance Contributions Act, okay? So your FICA is split into two things, okay? Some of it goes towards Social Security, and let me see, hold on. Social Security, Medicare, I don't know if any of it pays into the unemployment. I think it's just Social Security and Medicare. So it's two things. So FICA is it's like a 15.7% tax, I think. Your employer pays half and you pay the other half. Now, the vast majority of your FICA taxes go to Social Security. You get that back when you retire. That's what Social Security is, okay? If you're gonna talk about cutting FICA taxes, well, okay, we're going to be cutting our funding to Social Security and Medicare. Is that really a good idea? This is like a really sneaky way for Charlie Kirk to like defund like our arguably some of our best administered and most successful social programs that almost everybody likes. Yeah, I don't know. It's really dumb.
There's plenty. I could name a whole litany of departments I think I would cut to try to pay for it. But let's pretend that it's paid for, like everything Washington, D.C. says.
Yes,
Wouldn't it be worth it?
If you could cut workers' wages and not
wages, the
sorry,
taxes.
the taxes on workers' wages. If you could cut that, and on the other end, there would be absolutely no loss in anything that's a beneficial thing that's going to make workers' lives better. Then sure, why not? But I think I think you should still raise the minimum wage, because I think, again, having those 27 million people now having a living wage, having the ripple effects for lots of people who are already making more than the minimum wage, that's going to increase their wages. And then 1.3 million people need new jobs. Trust me, we can take care of that.
So you're obviously no fan of President Trump or his administration. During his presidency, the bottom 10% of workers actually had an income grow faster than the top 10% of workers. And so what we saw—
I am so curious how he arrived at that number. Your income? Is he talking about overall compensation or literally just your W-2 wages? Because if I had to guess, W-2 wages for the top 1% of this country probably don't grow very much. But that's because your W-2 wages, the paychecks you get from a company, aren't accounting for the vast majority of the wealth you're increasing yourself by. Because most of your wealth increase are coming from the increases in capital investments that you don't have to, like, it's not accounted for in a W-2 wage. There's 0% chance that under Trump, the bottom 10% of people increased their whatever more than the top, like, 1% or 10%, unless you're literally just going by W-2 increases. I'm really curious where that number comes from.
It's a real blue-collar boom over in the prior administration.
I think what was—
without having to abruptly raise the minimum wage. And the reason was, let me just finish, is an emphasis on entrepreneurship. This is an indicator that I don't hear talked about a lot, which is how many new businesses are being started. And when you raise the minimum wage, it's harder for the deli owner, the dry cleaner, to enter into the market, because all of a sudden the labor pool is like, man, $15 an hour, I could barely pay to keep the lights on. So if we want new business, and you agree, entrepreneurship is a good thing, right?
I think it's good to have new businesses. I'd like—
Oh shit, Jamie dropped to— Wait, did it drop to 183 or did it rise to 183? I don't remember what it was at before. Oh no, it's just chilling. It's still chilling around here. That mother of all short squeezes is coming soon, guys.
More of them to be organized as worker cooperatives.
We're going to talk about unions in a second.
We could get into that.
I want to get deep into unions.
But I do just want to say on what you're claiming about the Trump economy, because I think this is an important point, right? Why? So yes, sure. Why? What explains those numbers that you just mentioned? You'd say it's a new emphasis on entrepreneurship. I'd say it's two things.
I could go through other things
too,
including an energy renaissance.
But I think the primary things are two things. One, that quite a few states during that time period actually did raise their minimum wage, and I think that had a big effect on that. Two, sure, that employment increases give workers more bargaining power, which a lot of conservatives now object to. They say, oh, nobody wants to work. But employment increases give workers more bargaining power in the labor market, and that's a good thing. But that's not really this new emphasis on entrepreneurship that Trump was doing. If you look at all the employment figures, whether you're looking at the overall civilian employment rate in the United States, or whether you're breaking it down, black, white, Hispanic, whatever, all of those, you see the same trend, which is that in 2009, at the beginning of the Obama presidency, when the effects of the 2008 crash were really coming in, all of those were way up here. That it was like, you have like 10% unemployment. Over the course of the 8 years of Obama, it goes from 10% to 4.7% overall civilian, unemployment. And then sure, under the 4 years of Trump, or, like we'll give them a pass for the COVID part, but under those years of Trump, then you go from 4.7 to 3.5. So that is a continuation at an overall slower rate, but a continuation of what had happened before. And the reason I'm bringing that up is not that I'm a big Obama guy. I mean, look.
No, I know you're not.
As you know, I'm a Bernie Sanders would be a good start guy. But.
And I want to get into that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think you are
sure.
cleverly cloaking your radicalism in three issues that are agreed upon. We're going to get to the
I don't think so. I
your
think I front-loaded the radicalism and said these would be baby steps in the right direction. And I'm very confused about how you could be a populist without supporting those baby steps.
We're all Hegelians now, I suppose. Let me ask you this question.
No. But I do want to finish the point because I think it's an important one, right?
How many books by Hegel do you think Kirk has read here? Okay. We don't celebrate Nazism here. Okay, hey. Earnings for the bottom 10% are rising faster than earnings for the top 10%. Oh. Earnings for the bottom 10% seem to be rising faster, but not by much, and there are different ways to crunch the data. The measure he used also undercounts the earnings of the top 10%. State-level hikes in the minimum wage might have affected the earnings trends. One of President Donald Trump's central promises was to produce a rising economy that lifts all boats. At a rally in Wildwood, New Jersey, he touted record low unemployment rates, especially for African-Americans and Hispanics. Policies there's a blue-collar boom, Trump said January 28th. Earnings for the bottom 10% are rising faster than earnings for the top. I wonder what earnings means. I wish I knew what earnings means. Is earnings total compensation, or is earnings your W-2 paycheck? Does anybody know what the is it the BLS? When they say earnings, does earnings include your total compensation? There's data for each quarter and each year. The quarter numbers back Trump up, but the yearly numbers are more reliable. They capture seasonal employment and have a lower standard error. Looking at the changes from year to year, earnings for the lowest 10% grew faster in only 1 year, 2018. Here's how that looks. So Trump is right for only one of the 3 years of his presidency. We also looked at the change between 2016, the year before Trump took office. This is a percentage change as well. 2016, 2019, the low wage earners saw 46% compared to 35%. This is 2016 to 2019. The data's limitations. The earnings data misses income from a second part-time job that many low wage earners rely on, but more significant are the dollars it misses on the high end. It doesn't count the self-employed at all. Interesting. About 10% of the workforce, which in the higher income groups includes lawyers, engineers, financial advisors, and other lucrative professions. The earnings growth in that group could be very high because that's where we've seen some of the highest income growth over the past 30 years. Plus, the survey doesn't count earnings over $150,000. Wait, what? The survey doesn't count earnings over $150,000. Someone making $250,000 would be entered as earning $149,999. That makes the high-end number of the data artificially low. This measure is not well suited to the comparison of the extremes that Trump makes. Interesting. Hold on one second. What's your take on the corporate tax rate? I don't like corporate taxes. They're garbage, okay? Raise income taxes, raise capital gains taxes. Hold on one second. This is an annual earnings definition. Oh, okay. Doesn't include bonuses, commissions, overtime pay, and extra compensation. Does that include stocks? Do stocks show up on like a W-2 as like in-kind compensation, or your stock given as a bonus? Okay.
It's that I think that if you're going to say the populist thing about Trump economics, even though this is a guy who appointed hardcore union busters to the National Labor Relations Board, this is a guy who tried to throw millions of people off of healthcare, in terms of going against the Medicaid expansion. This is a guy, who tried to make it a lot harder to qualify for food aid for those families he talked about. That the big populist thing is that he oversaw economic growth and hence job growth. Well, hey, if that's enough to be a populist, Barack Obama was a better populist than he was, and Bill Clinton was a big populist because he oversaw lots of economic growth in the 1990s.
What I am saying, though, is that it's mischaracterized that the people that you say you care about, the lower workers, actually did really well under those 4 years. I think Trump could have been more conservative, more populist in certain things. And just to clarify on the food stamp issue, millions of people got off of food stamps under Trump voluntarily because their wages went up. But I don't want to get too bogged. I really don't want to get too bogged down on the Trump presidency.
You had that extra 1% change of unemployment going down, which is a continuation of previous trends. But
so let me kind of ask you more broadly. I guess we could go into some of these other aspects.
I have a question I'd love to ask you in a minute, by the way, but go for it.
Yeah, you're free to do that too, by the way. Do you trust the government?
Do I trust the government? Do I trust the government to tell me the truth, to do things that no, the government, by and large, that I think that those millionaires and billionaires, the guy in the shirt likes to talk about, exert vastly too much influence. But here's where I think people often go wrong from that true premise that the government is untrustworthy. I think premise is fine, but the conclusion, therefore we should have less government in the sense of we should have less expansive social services, we shouldn't give everybody health care. I think that that's a fundamental confusion because I think that there's a difference between talking about what the government can do to you. And there we're talking about police, ICE, the expansion of the national security state.
Yeah,
and
this is important.
And what the government has a legal obligation to do for you in terms of supporting what I would see as fundamental humans like healthcare and education.
Let me tell you where I think there's a flaw in this, and I really want you to talk about this. You say healthcare and education. There must be bureaucrats to enforce these things. You need the administrative state. So then you get the CDC, you get the NIH, you get unregulated agencies that you as being someone who focuses on democracy, focuses on the power of the people, where is the check and balance against the CDC, the NIH, HHS? For every government program, you need hundreds of thousands of desk workers, which is where the word bureaucrat comes from in French. So you say you don't trust the government, yet you support expanding the social services, which will then necessarily expand government. Why do you want to expand something you don't trust?
Well, first of all, congratulations on the French vocabulary. I like it. But
I have other words too. We could, après nous les déluge, which means after me the flood. We could talk about all my favorite French terms if you'd like. We could do a whole thing. You write for the Jacobin magazine, for goodness sake, so we could exchange notes on Robespierre and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I've only read the Confessions once. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I'd be happy to do all of that. Although, my French is like Duolingo. I can't do that much. But
I'm done, I promise.
But I would say that if you don't want
bureaucrats
to have more power, if that's the big objection.
No, that's part of the objection.
Okay,
it's an element of it.
Sure, so let's start with that element. So if you don't want bureaucrats to have more power, then the thing that you should really object to, right? Because you said earlier, you think we got to have some kind of social safety net. So we're agreeing that there are some social services programs. We're arguing about how expansive they should be and how they should work.
Generous versus limited.
Sure. Okay, but this is the thing. If you want those bureaucrats to have less power, you don't want limited. That's the last thing that you want. You want generous, and here's why. Here's why.
You're gonna have to convince me on this one.
I know. Like I really liked what you just did there. That was some good.
So to restrain their power, you must give them a lot of power.
No, you're not giving them any power. You're taking away their power. It's a really simple argument. Here's how it goes. That means-tested programs give power to bureaucrats. When you say you have to jump through all these hoops to qualify for something, and there's some bureaucrat who gets to decide whether you get it or not,
here's why you're wrong.
Bureaucrats have more power, whereas when you say this is a legal right that every single person has as a citizen, no Canadian is having a bureaucrat decide whether they qualify for healthcare. Or in Finland, you talked about all of the policies that, in Norway that you thought would be an issue for me. Finland
is the poorest
where they have,
country.
Okay, I don't think it's because of this, but in Finland, where they don't even have private schools, and certainly you have a right to higher education as a citizen, the way that you have historically in lots of countries, and I think it's worked very well. But when you have that, you don't have students jumping through financial aid, bureaucracy, hurdles, and does this person qualify to get school? Does that person qualify to school?
Keep in mind, Finland is Nordic, not Scandinavian. Scandinavia is only Norway, Sweden, Denmark. And then wait, did I say Nordic? Finland, Sweden, Denmark are the three Scandinavian countries. And then Nordic includes Iceland and Finland. I think Iceland is Scandinavia too. I don't think Iceland counts as Scandinavia. I think it's just those three. Oh, and Greenland. Wait, Iceland might count as Scandinavia. Hold on, let me check. Destiny is right. Norway, not Denmark. Scandinavia refers to Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. No, fuck you. I was right in the beginning. Scandinavia is Denmark, Norway, Sweden. If you say Nordic, then you can expand that to Finland and Iceland, and then like the Faroe Islands, whatever the fuck that is, and maybe Greenland, but nobody cares about this shit. It's like 10 people that live in those places.
Democrats have the power to decide what's up, because that's the case where bureaucrats have power over you. If everybody gets something as a right of citizenship, bureaucrats have no power in that circumstance.
But let me ask you something, though. So you want Medicare for all.
Yeah.
Yet HHS is the largest civilian branch of our government. So as we have expanded Medicare, as we have expanded Medicaid, it hasn't been means tested as you want. We have hundreds of thousands of desk workers that are doing the means testing. Are you qualified?
Yeah.
Medicare reimbursements. And so even
Yes,
under your example, it's
Medicaid,
woefully idealistic. The point is,
Medicaid is a means
you
tested.
cannot have a generous social program without a massive bureaucratic and, dare I say, corrupt administrative state.
Well, I think
Woodrow
Dare I
Wilson would
say.
say that.
Well,
He says, you need the administrative state.
You think I like Woodrow Wilson, the guy who
Probably.
the
He
guy,
was a college professor, so
and
a college president. So he's kind of in your world.
Well, okay, trust me, neither of those things earn any points for me, but but I think that
That's fair.
But I mean, Woodrow Wilson is the guy who resegregated the federal bureaucracy after it was integrated.
Do a whole speech on
He
that.
put Eugene V. Debs in jail. Nobody on the left is going to see Woodrow Wilson as a hero. Liberals, nobody on the left. But I was just going to say,
I know plenty of people that would, but that's fine.
I don't think
How about
you're going to find a lot of socialists.
FDR,
who agree.
LBJ,
But
John
they have to-
Dewey,
Don't forget
all
to
these
type
people
well.
believed in a
Last
strong
stream before
administration.
it's
Well, I mean,
removed.
you're rattling off a bunch of liberals, but that's okay. We don't need to argue about the historical figures. Let's just say this. If you're talking about administrative state, bureaucracy, well, your example is Medicaid, which is a means-tested program. And even at that, even despite the means testing, which is the part that gives the bureaucrats their power, which is also the part I'm objecting to, even despite that, we're talking about bureaucracies. As I think you mentioned earlier, the government has no monopoly on bureaucracies, plenty of bureaucracies in the private sector. And if you want to know which programs have the smallest overhead, right? Even Medicaid, even despite the means testing, Medicaid, Medicare, all of those have much smaller administrative overhead than any of the private insurance companies, because the private insurance companies, one, they have to plan out their strategy for competing with each other, and two, the private insurance companies have a vast bureaucracy that is dedicated to finding ways to deny people's claims, because they've always got one eye on the bottom line for shareholders. And one question I'm very curious about, by the way,
How about
is
that?
You object for all of these reasons. You think it's too interventionist. You think it's too much administrative state to just providing everybody with health care.
These are all elements of the critique.
Providing people with health care is a human right, so that you can have like what people I know in the UK always tell me, which is, hey,
Our Forgotten Shrine's good.
When whatever, my mom got cancer, when whatever the situation is, people will say, the only person I ever talked about this was with a doctor, which is very different from Americans' experience with healthcare. If you can object to that on the grounds that that's too much big government, I am really curious whether you'd say the same thing for fire services. Like would you be okay with it if we didn't have public fire services?
Absolutely not. As I said, small but strong.
Okay.
The government exists, as it says in the preamble of the Constitution, amongst many other things, to secure the blessings of liberty, to ensure domestic tranquility. And Hamilton said it best, that you need a nimble yet effective federal government, good at what it does, but not overreaching. And that's the whole idea of conservative populism, is within this constitutional republic framework. I'm a big fan of firefighters, police officers. I'm a big fan of Border Patrol. I'm a big fan of all these sort of things. But when all of a sudden I believe you get outside of the constitutional limits, is where you birth this fourth branch of government. And our mutual hatred of Woodrow Wilson is a perfect example of this, because he really believed the state, this is a Hegelian idea, will usher in that utopia, that the state is God, that through the mechanisms of the state, we will be able to turn the chapter and with it remake man. He wasn't the only person that believed that. FDR did, Lyndon Baines Johnson did as well, where we as conservatives and conservative populists say, hold on a second, that is not what the state is there to do for. Let me just say one last thing.
How do I get rid of sepsis?
The state is there to preserve the natural law with prudence and wisdom, to hopefully develop families and foster children, not to try to remake human beings. When it comes to healthcare, not only do I have a moral complaint that it's not the role of government, it's also not good at doing it, and it also hurts the everyday common man. So I have two.
I don't think either of those things are true.
But I have a moral argument, and I also have a utilitarian argument. I just want to make sure that's clear.
Let's start with the moral argument, because I am very unclear on this, because why is it that having public firefighters or public police is not overreach, but having public health care is? Why would it be objectionable if instead of having public fire services that everybody gets to use. You had everybody just having to have private fire insurance, and if you had a better private fire insurance plan, they'd probably put out your fire, faster. Or maybe we had public fire insurance, but only for people, the poorest people or the oldest people, which would be the exact equivalent for healthcare. Or the same thing for policing, the equivalent, for like security insurance, because all of these things seem very similar to me, because having your house burned down, being victimized by a crime, or needing chemotherapy, those are all cases where your life and limb is in danger. Like, these seem pretty parallel to me. What do you see as the big disanalogy?
So the first problem is mostly local, police and fire, so therefore it's more accountable.
Okay.
So the dollars don't go to some sort of albatross to the kingdom of Washington, D.C. of unelected, unknown, kind of just unchecked bureaucrats. That's number one.
Lost
Number
relationship
two,
points?
we
Fuck.
do have a system in the country, despite what you're saying, where if you need health care, you will be taken care of. Is it broken? Is it
what
inadequate?
I just said, though, right?
Well, no, hold on a second. I'm saying it is illegal to deny someone service of care. Illegal. Now, do we have problems with our healthcare system?
No one cares
Do you
about
think if
emergency
you put
rooms.
me in
That's
a
not what
room
we're
and I
talking
could strike
about.
a huge bargain with you? I think that there are elements of the German system that are admirable. I will say that. Where you have a public system and a private system. Where I start to all of a sudden say timeout, no go, no fly zone, is where I hear people like Bernie Sanders, and I'm paraphrasing, who want to get rid of private insurance as we know it. That's a big mistake. Here's how I think the biggest problem with healthcare is. It's not individualized. It's way too bureaucratic, way too top down. And yes, we have pharmaceutical companies that are addicting people to drugs that they should not be addicted to. We have a sick care problem in our country, and I agree with a lot of people on the left with this. On this, maybe we'll agree that we have an obesity problem, we have a problem of how we get our food, we have a corporate farming problem. I agree with all those things. Do I think that a government-run system of healthcare that will be more similar to how the IRS or how the Postal Service works, that's somehow going to be the solution to that? Absolutely not.
Well,
but if you put me in a room,
the Postal Service is amazing, and I do not think.
Can you say that again?
The Postal Service is amazing. It has been an engine of upward mobility. It has been an engine of racial equality. If you building the black middle class, massively an engine of that.
Have you ever used the Postal Service?
Okay, who says this? Have you ever used the Postal Service? Yeah. Wait, have you ever mailed shit? I don't understand. The Postal Service is like one of the, like, if you were gonna attack a public institution, why would you attack the Postal Service, which like can guarantee like the delivery of a parcel or letter in like 2 days or whatever to any single fucking part of the United States? Of all the things that you could ever attack, why would you attack the Postal Service? The Postal Service does pretty fucking well. And because of the weird like stipulations or regulations tied to it, the Postal Service has to pay for itself. It's not even allowed to like draw, I don't think it's allowed to draw from public funds and shit. Like the Postal Service is supposed to be self-sustaining. And I think it's even more brutal than that, because not only does it have to be self-sustaining, they have to like prove the income for like their future pensions and shit as well. Like,
and the Postal Service will carry a letter from here to Alaska
So will FedEx.
for, no, not for the same price, and they're certainly not going to serve.
You know it's going to get there.
No, I do not know that, and it's certainly not going to do it. It's never going to get there with as much service to out of the way rural areas.
I got to give you credit.
Anything.
I've never heard anyone defend the Post Office.
that's because you don't know anybody that mails anything ever, you dumb fuck. Come on.
Cheap. Well, you need to talk to more people, because like the post office is an amazing institution, and it should be massively expanded. In fact, one of the best things I think they have in some of those
Fight no more than 3 road battles.
is postal banking, which if we did that, Bernie
hospital.
Sanders' proposal would immediately put out of business all the payday loan vampires that prey on unbanked people, would create millions of new good unionized jobs. Postal Service is great, but I do want to go back, because I don't want this to get,
I got to
I don't want this to get lost,
The Post Office
though,
lost hundreds of thousands of packages and was 6 months late. That's who you want to run our healthcare system?
I think that,
Wait, is there like, can we look up like packages lost between FedEx, UPS, USPS? Is there like a data on this or whatever? I don't know if data is publicly posted about lost packages. Whatever.
First of all, I think that if you actually have a fairer look at the numbers, I think the Postal Service does do a really good job. I think that oftentimes when people say no, they are not using the same metrics to evaluate it they'd use to evaluate everything else. But if you want to know something that would be very much like what Medicare for All would be like if we had it in the United States, then I'd say looking at delivery of packages is probably not what you want to do. What you probably want to look at is countries like Canada, where they already have Medicare for all, Great Britain, where they've gone further, and
Let me tell you why that's
the
different,
hospitals
though.
are publicly owned.
That's all the. Let's talk about that.
Well, okay, but those are places.
That's a different
where,
thing.
Where people live longer, where fewer of their babies die, where the rate of mortality amenable to healthcare is way better. Or look, you said you want it to be local. That you don't like the fact.
Super local.
Sure, local, great. So if all the hospitals were municipally owned, you'd be cool with that?
All the hospitals, it would be, well, first of all, that's actually the case in a lot of places. There's a lot of county-run hospitals all across the country.
I'm not denying they're county-run.
Actually.
Make him answer the question.
So you would be okay with that. So it really has nothing to do with centralization.
Well, no, it does. Trust me. The city of Chicago can be equally, if not more corrupt than the Kingdom of Washington, D.C.
Is it going to be more corrupt than the private insurance companies?
I mean, that's a good question.
Okay,
Let me ask you a question.
But you did also say, right? And I
Make him
really want
answer
to
it.
make sure we
Local
we
is
do this,
generally
'cause
better, but I'm not going to die on the Cook County is a great county hill.
Well,
trust me.
this does go back to what you said earlier, though, when I asked you about fire protection, because you said, well, the difference is that nobody could be turned down from the hospital.
That is a law.
Yes, that is a law. I'm glad that it's a law.
I am too.
Okay, good, wonderful. We agree on that. That is a good government intervention to stop the private sector from doing what it would otherwise do and did otherwise do before that law was passed. But also, I would say, do the equivalent for the fire services. That the only people who get it without having to pay at the point of service are the poorest people, are the oldest people. Everybody else has to rely on private fire insurance, which varies wildly in quality. And if you don't have private fire insurance and you're not poor enough to qualify for the means-tested, bureaucrat-enabling system for poor people, and you're not old enough for the other one, and you end up having to have the fire department come and save you anyway, then you have a giant bill that's going to bankrupt you. Do you think that sounds like a fair system?
No. So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
So is that, here's where, how do you define healthcare? This is a very important question, right? Because healthcare could be, hey, I just got a gunshot wound I need to be taken care of. Absolutely. Or healthcare could be, I'm 800 pounds overweight, I'm eating terribly, I have no sort of interest to exercise or eat well. Why all of a sudden should that person be put into the same exact level of care of someone that has saved money and taken care of their health? Why should someone...
Oh my God, the best counter question here would be, do you think somebody that's not vaccinated then should get preferential treatment versus somebody that is vaccinated in hospitals or vice versa or whatever? Oh my God, that would be such a killer question. God, that would be such a killer question.
Who's 800 pounds overweight be given in this sort of, realm? Why should human agency and choice have zero emphasis at all?
What you're describing, the only difference between that and what already exists in the United States is that we would have to add, and they're rich enough that they can afford really high quality medical care. Right now, somebody who's 800 pounds, who doesn't watch their diet, who chain smokes, etc.
I agree, yes.
But
you could add chain smoking on
But
that.
sure, all those things.
So you think that none of that should be given a preference?
Well, here's what I'm saying, that I think in the system that we have right now, somebody who checks every single one of those boxes, but is rich enough to afford the best medical care, skips in line ahead of the person who takes care of their health, exercises every day, doesn't smoke, eats well, but lost their job or just is cobbling together 4 part-time jobs like so many Americans are, and thus doesn't have employer health insurance.
It's an interesting question. So you believe just because you have better money, you shouldn't be able to have better stuff?
I believe...
Or more money, better stuff?
I believe that when it comes to something like healthcare, no.
That's a very broad thing.
I do not believe that people should get life-saving services preferentially because of how much money they have. I think that...
So how much money they've saved? How about that? Someone saved their whole life, and they said, in case there's a disaster, I'm going to put $500 away a month. They get to age 45, and all of a sudden they realize that they have some sort of health complication. They shouldn't be able to take advantage of the money they've saved for their entire life?
Well, this actually goes back to the very first thing that I said, like the opening couple sentences.
What is justice, I guess, right?
That I said, Because what I said is that I don't want some people to have dramatically worse lives than others because of factors outside of their control. Now,
What about things they can control, though?
Well, if we
like saving money.
if we lived in a world where all economic inequality was due to thrift versus indolence or laziness versus industriousness, I would have much less objection to this stuff than I do in the world where we actually live, where somebody who saved up their whole lives, but then they have unexpected medical expenses that bankrupt them, which happens all the time. That they have is going to get worse health care than somebody who has never saved at all, but is somebody if Hunter Biden, right, had some massive medical bill tomorrow,
he would probably have, considering his lifestyle.
Sure, right? So if Hunter Biden had that huge medical bill tomorrow, then he would get in line ahead of people
for multiple reasons, both access to power and also money.
Sure.
So that's a good example.
Those are both bad things, but they have
largely unearned, and I agree.
Sure. So, and I would say the same thing about the Walton children. I would say the same thing about anybody who is inheriting money. When you go to the hospital, or you go to buy.
Sorry, meme time. Quick meme. I genuinely don't know why I was banned. Context: Bad Bunny was talking about fat phobia. So here are his recent messages. I guess it's because being skinny just doesn't scream unhealthy in the same way that being fat does. I didn't realize how many people hated fat people, but until recently, lol. Yes, why are you harassing me? I'm just chilling, bro. And then he said, I did get into a slight argument earlier, though. Some dude was being racist towards white people, so I was like, bro, that's racist. And then everyone thought I was dumb. They also thought I was white, even though I'm black. Bunny banned you herself. Also, you can't be racist towards white people. Racism is systemic. It requires a dominant power hierarchy. This is not something black people benefit from, but suffer at the hands of. You can be discriminatory towards white people, sure, but racist, no. Anyways, don't expect an unban from me, since Bunny herself was annoyed enough by you to process the ban. I just want to explain real quick how stupid this is. So, you can be discriminatory, but not racist, okay? The funny thing is that if they were using these words, if they knew what any of these words mean, they would actually flip that, in that, yeah, you can be racist towards somebody, but you can't be discriminatory towards somebody. Racism implies hating somebody because of some racial attribute. Discrimination implies selectively choosing people based on a trait. If we're going to say that an unjust hierarchy exists between two groups, that means that one group has the ability to enact discrimination, meaning choosing somebody other than somebody else. So white people as a class could discriminate against black people when it comes to choosing jobs, but anybody could be racist. If you wanted to really get into well, what do these words mean, Because technically, you can be discriminatory towards people but not racist. That doesn't make any sense. If I go online and I start spamming, oh, I don't like this guy, he's an N-word, or I don't like this dude because he's this race, I'm not really discriminating. I'm not choosing between one. I mean, I guess maybe in a very colloquial sense, but I am being racist, right? Much the same that if an employer is I'm not going to hire that guy because he's black or Asian. Well, now I am engaging in racial discrimination, right? It's it's a really weird way to flip these words on its head, I guess, when you really just want to be racist and try to find a way not to be.
Insurance, they don't ask you, did this money come from being thrifty and saving your whole life?
Let me ask you a question.
Or did this money come from stock ownership? Or did this money come from inheritance? They just ask, do you have the money to afford this?
And that's part of markets, right? Is that you're not able to make a moral claim for every dollar bill, but generally markets will go towards value and value creation. I actually want to close this thought on one thing, because it goes to your other thing that
actually, could I mean, if you'll indulge me, could I ask you a 30-second question?
Sure, because I really want to close that point.
I know we're coming up to it,
yes.
but I'm so fascinated by this, right?
Fascinated.
So we agreed
earlier.
Is
it the firefighter thing again?
It's not the firefighter.
Okay, good.
Okay. Although, I think there's more to discuss
I'm
there.
very anti-fire.
They have well, that's good. You should be equally anti-cancer, and then just like we have fire departments, we should have Medicare for all.
That's why I think people who eat well and don't smoke and make good decisions should be rewarded for human agency.
Yeah.
Man, dude, Ben Burgis, the philosophy professor, could just drill on this. You just cannot tie healthcare, like access to your personal life choices. It is just the hairiest, messiest. You just absolutely can't do it. It's really hard to even do it for like the vaccine mandate shit. Like it's so difficult to dive into that thing. Like how responsible ought you be for your healthcare? You know, do we stop helping cancer patients that worked in factories that had smoke, that were around secondhand smoke? Like there's just so like yeah.
Which is not at all what
because the
markets and
inverse of
healthcare
your
do.
statement, I
But
just want to make
having-
sure this is clear.
but-
The inverse is you say that people should not be penalized for factors outside of their control. The inverse is that I think people should be rewarded for factors inside of their control.
Yeah, and
which
most
is
of
a
what
preference
what
on
we've got
You
right
are rewarded. You're rewarded with good health.
now
action.
is not
No,
about.
I agree with that.
But the
so
having- but-
I want a
but- but-
system
but-
that rewards
but
people for
here's-
good choices.
Okay, so here's what I want to ask, real quick,
Sure.
I promise. So we established earlier how much we both liked Jeff Bezos.
Yes.
Dislike best Jeff Bezos.
Are you going to ask me, should I raise his taxes?
Well, because this is why I'm curious about
As
it.
I probably will be.
Because I saw in 2019.
Yes,
at
with Kyle Kalinske.
Yeah, and he asked you, would you be willing to raise Jeff Bezos' taxes by like 1% to provide housing for every single homeless veteran? And your response at that time was that you'd hope he'd do it voluntarily. And I think at this point we've established that's not going to happen. He'd prefer to buy a spaceship. So
That's probably true. Yeah, so if you put a gun to my head, would I raise his taxes? I mean, I guess if I was a representative, I guess, yes.
okay, that's good.
For other
This is-
reasons.
this is progress. I'm so proud of you,
Let me
Charlie.
tell you, I said, I guess
man.
conditionally, if all of a sudden there would be a comparable piece of legislation alongside of it that would actually value and prioritize things I cared about. If it was just to raise his taxes to go into the current albatross
Okay, but-
pit
but-
of
but
the
if-
administrative
but if-
state, I'd rather have him buy spaceships than give money to Fauci.
But if it was earmarked for a housing for homeless veterans, and you would say yes.
The
now,
answer is yes, because I think Jeff
Outstanding.
Bezos,
This is-
from a
this is
moral
such good
standpoint,
progress.
but let me tell you why. Let me clarify why.
Sure.
Jeff Bezos games your favorite department, the Postal Service. He games the corporate tax loophole system. Jeff Bezos has a total disregard for what I consider to be the American way of life, and he has this weird fascination of going into orbit. And guess what? I hope he stays there.
Okay, well, I congratulate you on this progress.
Well, I mean, you could call it progress. You could also call it a commitment to prudence. I want to ask you a question. I will get back to the other question I want. I want to ask you,
Ask away.
and I want to get more into philosophy here. What's
Sure,
your view of Karl
happy to.
Marx?
My view
of
of
what?
Karl Marx is pretty positive. I think that
Chrome Marx?
I think that you can certainly find things like anybody who's writing in the mid-19th century that, you know, if there's nothing that you think is wrong about 100, you know, whatever, 150 years later, then like something has gone very wrong, right? You know, there should be ways that you can say, no, this part no longer makes sense. You got to rethink that. I think you have to look at it a la carte, but I think that Karl Marx is a basically positive figure. I think that the theory of
Oh,
history
Karl
is
Marx.
mostly right.
I thought he said Chrome Marx. I'm so sorry.
And I also, so yeah, I see you smiling. Happy to get into it.
I'm happy to debate
I'm-
the Hegelian
Well,
dialectic and the phenomenology of spirit.
Oh, okay.
No,
All right.
not debate it. We can discuss
not,
it.
Not
but-
where I thought this was going, but that's cool. But I think,
No, I mean that's basically what you mean by the theory
well,
of history,
I
right?
don't think it is. I think there's a big difference there.
He was the head of the young Hegelians.
Well, he started out as a Hegelian, and then he rejected it in favor of what in some ways structurally is similar, but in some ways is the opposite because it's based on materialism. But here's what I do think when we talk
Two
about
men
Marx.
unequipped to talk philosophy, happy to talk. Ben Burgis is literally a philosophy professor. He's a PhD. If anybody, he should be able to discuss this.
Because I think that there's an interesting thing that happens here, that when people talk about Marx, they tend to say, well, any like dictator who existed in the 20th century, who claimed to be inspired by Marx, you know, people who were born decades after he died, that discredits everything that Marx said. But then when we're talking about a philosopher like John Locke, who a lot of
Love John Locke.
yeah, right. And then, but then like John Locke, you know, the man both philosophically justified and was personally involved in the slave trade, given his role, you know, formulating the Constitution of South Carolina colony. The man philosophically justified the genocidal dispossession of Native Americans.
That's a misinterpretation.
Well,
but
I think
that's fine.
so, right? Because like his view is they don't really have property rights because they're not using the land properly, and so they haven't mixed their labor with it in the right way to establish a right to it. Whereas not only did Marx never not praise any dictatorships that were alive, you know, when he was alive, his model for what he thought a transition to socialism would look like was the Paris Commune, which was ultra-democratic. And the only head of state anywhere in the world who he liked enough to send a friendly telegram to was the democratically elected Abraham Lincoln, who he liked for anti-slavery reasons.
So there's a lot of things I want to get into. So with the Paris Commune,
Yeah, sure.
are you your favorable view of that? You do write for the Jacobin magazine, so I would imagine. Do you think that, I guess this is a question about human nature.
Sure.
Sure.
Do you take a Rousseauian view of human nature? Do you think man is born free and remains the rest of his life in chains? Or do you believe in tabula rasa, like blank slate? Or what is your view of human nature?
Okay, sure.
Because I think
No
that's
tabula
actually
rasa,
instructive.
guys.
Sure.
We took the quiz.
So we covered this a little bit earlier, but I'm happy to go back into it. So I think that, as far as human nature goes, are people fundamentally kind and decent and cooperative? Are people fundamentally selfish and cruel? I think that to fully answer that, you need to get really deep into evolutionary psychology and a lot of other things. And the answer is incredibly murky. I think the only really honest thing you can say about it is what David Hume says in his essay on the afterlife, when he says that it would be really hard to sort out who deserves to go to heaven and who goes to hell, because most of us float somewhere between vice and virtue. But what I think is that almost everybody gets the relationship between the human nature issue and the capitalism and socialism issue exactly wrong.
So tell me why.
Because
you touched on this earlier.
Yeah, I did touch on this earlier.
Okay, because if you have a Hobbesian view of human nature, you think that you should actually want big government.
I'm happy to get into it. So I think that...
which is what Hobbes believed, I guess.
I certainly don't want big government in Hobbes' sense. This gets back to
the Leviathan.
This gets back to the distinction between the things that government could do to you, like break up families and deport people, and the things that government is under a legal obligation
I have to stop you there.
To do for
Stop
you.
him.
You really think
Stop him.
that government has the ability to restrain itself from saying, this is what I can do, what we could do for you? You think government can have this dividing line between benevolence and malevolence?
You don't think the government can restrain itself? I thought you were all about limited government.
Well, constitutionally, absolutely.
Okay, so you think the government
but only if
could
you don't
could obey restraints about what it's supposed to do?
Only with the fierce limits of courts and not even establishing those departments in the first place. That the best way to limit government is to not create those departments or those means to do it.
Well, I think
not have a spy agency domestically, for example. It's
Sure.
like, we're only going to spy on a couple people.
Well, okay, so I think that might be the first thing.
What I'm saying is once you introduce that power, it will be abused.
Other than your hatred of Jeff Bezos and Hunter Biden, I think the first thing we've agreed on tonight is that we shouldn't have domestic spy agencies.
I totally agree.
I think, but I think that if
including the Postal Service, which spies on our citizens.
I think that the
what is the reference to that?
That's the primary effect of the Postal Service. I don't think that's
You're
because
right. You're too busy losing my mail.
of the Postal Service.
Yeah, he must have had a really important letter lost before, I guess,
the
huh?
Postal Service, given how cheaply
You
its
don't have to
services,
keep defending the Postal Service. I'm starting to feel sorry for you, man. You don't have to do this.
I think. Well, I don't think you should attack the Postal Service. I think that it's been a tremendous economic benefit to many millions of Americans.
All right, okay. We don't have to stay bogged down on it.
But I do think, on the philosophical question,
that's
that's
fine.
where you want to go. I think that the more you're worried that one person given too much power over another is going to treat that other like a little kid might treat a fly trapped in a jar, the more what you should want in both politics and the economy is to have power be spread as evenly as possible. So earlier, and I want to make sure I'm addressing this because I wouldn't want anybody to think I was avoiding the subject. Earlier, you were saying that I was like hiding my radicalism by talking about the things that we could do immediately, which is, I've got to say, a little bit funny because I do spend a lot of time writing about the more radical long-term stuff.
Like banning private beaches and letting in the entire country of Afghanistan.
Yeah, I think that first of all, I don't think the entire country of Afghanistan wants to come. I think a lot of the entire country of Afghanistan,
I was being
unfortunately,
facetious. Finish this
celebrates
thought,
supports.
But you actually do write about it.
Supports the Taliban. I think refugees fleeing from the crisis that we created absolutely should come in.
Oh, no. Oh, now we stumble into foreign policy with the absolute most dog shit takes. Everybody in Afghanistan loves the Taliban. The only people that don't like Afghanistan are the people that are there from the crisis that we created. Oh, yikes.
But yeah, I do write all the time about the radical stuff. Those things are not uncontroversial. I don't think I'm afraid to talk about it.
Who said that? Wait, he just said that. Wait, am I crazy? Did he not just say that?
But it's the supports.
But you actually do write about it.
Supports the Taliban. I think refugees fleeing from the crisis that we created absolutely should come in. But yeah, I do write all the time.
He did not say that? Wait, how did he not just say that? What?
Like banning private beaches and letting in the entire country of Afghanistan.
Yeah, I think that well, first of all, I don't think the entire country of Afghanistan wants to come. I think a lot of the entire country of Afghanistan,
I was being
unfortunately,
facetious. Finish this
celebrates
thought,
the
yes.
supports.
But you actually do write about that.
Supports the Taliban. I think refugees fleeing from the crisis that we created absolutely should come in. But yeah, I do write all the time about the radical stuff. Those things are not uncontroversial. I don't think I'm afraid to talk about it. But I think that when you talk about the really radical long-term goals, you say a lot of times you like to just talk about the value of markets, and I do agree. Markets are good at some things.
Good, we agree on that.
Yeah, they have I think that if what you're concerned with is coordinating production of consumer goods with what people want, I think markets are good at that. I think that there's a difference between markets in consumer goods and the labor market, and I think the difference is that the labor market.
How someone answers this question will help them navigate a political conversation. What is a greater human nature? A competition or B cooperation?
It's obviously cooperation is the greater human nature. That's just like absolutely true. How can you think anything different?
Mondragon in Spain, employ 80,000 people, extremely successful.
Did somebody say Mondragon?
Lots of research and development stuff, and is worker-owned. People get to elect management. People have operating agreements. They're like the equivalent of a union contract, but with no separate boss on the other side of the bargaining table. And so if you say, should we have as a goal of government policy that the private sector be more like Mondragon, or should it be more like Amazon or Walmart? I'd say it should be more like Mondragon. And one reason I think that is precisely that the more you worry that human nature is selfish and cruel, the less power you should want one person to have over another in the workplace or in society as a whole, which is why I want democracy in both cases.
So first of all, I understand the argument of employees owning companies. We have that in America too. Publix grocery chains is a great example in Florida. That could still happen in a market, but I guess this is, and you haven't taken a position on human nature, which I think is fine.
Well, I mean, I think I've taken a position, to be clear, right?
There's some ambiguity in it. That's fine.
My position
is, you said, if you believe this, then you should want this.
My position is that human nature is a mess, that there's a lot of truth to both pessimistic and optimistic.
I think that's fair, and that's more
accounts, but I also think that to the extent that you worry about the bad stuff, that gives you a reason to want to distribute power evenly.
Right, so the best way to distribute power evenly, in the opinion of a conservative, would be first and foremost to empower the family.
Family, yes,
and
always.
to allow not just workers, but entrepreneurs to create new companies and allow workers to be able to have abundant choices in the workforce or in the workplace. The best competition, the best way to empower people is choice, is competition. Is not to say that we are now going to mandate that you need some sort of labor designation on your board. That's been the opposite of choice. I'll give you an example, which is that if you have a very specific skill and you work for Ford, right now, Ford Motor Company, you have to be unionized to work for the United Auto Workers, right? It's mandated. Whereas like, well, if you had more competition, then maybe there might be non-labor there.
So this is what always confuses me about that point, because I hear conservatives saying this all the time, that if there's a union contract in place that says that to be hired for this job, you have to be a member of the union, or really is usually you have to either be a member of the union or pay an agency fee, but whatever, we can just say be a member of the union, that if you have that this is an unfreedom. Workers are being forced to do something against their will. But what confuses me about that is that any condition for hiring, you could say, is forcing workers to do something against their will.
Did Destiny fix his beard or something? I bought a new trimmer. My last trimmer only had two settings. One was way too long and the other was way too short. So I would like trim it sometimes and it would look way too short and then it would grow in for like a week. But now I have one with the perfect setting. Okay, so I trim it to exactly where it needs to go. All right.
On equal bargaining power, workers need.
Do you think we can take the layer?
Way more.
I think we can take the layer. I think we can do it.
You're misrepresenting business. I really do.
Any given worker, that's by and large, it's much easier to replace a worker than it is for a worker to replace a job. And given that, sure, I agree that any time you make something, you can
stupid
only have
fucking
this job,
meme.
you can only keep this job if you do X. That's a case where you're limiting people's freedom. But if you really go with that principle, then that should go for everything at a job. And I would say out of all the things that people are forced to do for certain jobs, the one that's least objectionable is you have to have this thing that actually protects, makes it harder to fire you, that that helps you keep more of the wealth you generate for the company in your pocket, that gives you some sort of say because you get to vote in a union contract. That's way less objectionable than all the other stuff you're forced to do to have a job.
Like what?
Like what? Well, I mean, I think if you work...
Like not show up drunk? Like... I mean,
I think we could agree that that one's reasonable.
Okay.
And if that was the extent of workplace authoritarianism in the United States,
hold on, I really want to zero in on this. I want to zero in on this because
concerned about it. But
I want to zero in this because I'll agree that there's some externalities and some jerks and some dirtbags. Do you really believe? Let's say a majority.
Sure.
A majority of workers are being exploited by their bosses and that the owners of production. You really think that in America?
What do you mean by exploited?
You used the word. You said exploitation or workplace authoritarianism.
Yeah, the word
that is your term.
The word I used was authoritarianism, not exploitation. But I'd be happy to talk about exploitation.
But let's say, do you think that a majority of workers, to use your terms, are living under a workplace autocrat or form of such right now in America? Let's say a majority, 50+1.
Yeah, much more than that.
Cute.
So
we're going to have definitely disagreement on this.
Sure. So they have a if you're saying, do the vast majority of people who work for a living in the United States work at workplaces where
they're living under some sort of tyranny without them realizing it?
So, okay, let's be clear about what we're talking about here. So they have the vast majority of workers go to work in workplaces where they don't get to make any sort of managerial decisions. Those are made for them. And
why?
It's your way.
Ben, let's be fair. Why is it? Because someone took a risk to start a company and those workers didn't. Because they decided to go into their savings, to go to a bank, to take out a line of credit, to take a risk to start something new.
Do you think everybody has an equal ability to do that?
Of course not. I mean, absolutely not. Does everyone have an equal ability to go dunk a basketball or to become a decathlete? Of course not. I mean, does everyone have an equal ability to become a college professor?
Ben Burgis is actually so bad at debate. Holy shit! I thought he's done a decent job with this entire conversation.
No.
Sure.
I mean, that's a silly argument. Are some people going to create better widgets and gizmos than somebody else? Of course not. But what people do have an equal ability to do is they have an equal ability to take the risk. There are plenty of people that couldn't split the atom that work extra hours that go into their savings account.
Ability to take the risk.
Hold on. Why is that? Why isn't that someone?
The reason people don't have
millions of people.
I figured it out. I just figured it out. I'm so glad actually. Now listening to this and listening to Voucher yesterday, when people are cutting people off like this. So I used to think, so like sometimes I'm cutting people off because I really want to like get a word in or I really want to say something. I think that people cut people off.
Is certainly exploited by their workers, except for the ones that bring no value to the workplace for certain definitions of exploit.
Yeah, that's why they're asking what he means by exploitation. I think when people start cutting people off, it's because they know that their argument sucks shit. So they're trying to cut them off because they don't want them to like actually run down the argument. Yeah, I think that's what this is. This is what's happening right now.
Start new businesses every year in our country.
That's completely consistent with this. The reason that people don't all have an equal ability to take the risk is that what would be risked is very different depending on your initial financial situation.
No, but there's plenty of people that...
Okay, but there's a difference between plenty of people...
Equal ability meaning that do you have the freedom to do that? Do you have the willingness to lever yourself up, to go to the bank and say, you know what? I want to take out a second mortgge on my home. And I'm going to go start some sort of shoe company on the side of the street. But then all of a sudden you're saying that the 5 people that are working in that cobbler store are being oppressed by the guy that might have gone 2 years without paying himself just to be able to start that small business. Okay. And so here's where I'm starting to just like, I wish you'd give a little more appreciation.
I would like to separate a couple
how capital is deployed.
I would like to separate a couple issues here because I think a lot of different things.
Charlie Kirk is being super bad faith, right? It's not, he just keeps like adding and adding and adding and adding. Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious what Benny Boy is getting at here. Like there is not equal risk, okay? Like I start a business with extra money in my fucking retirement account. You start a business by doing a third mortgage on your home. We are not equal, right? We're not the same. These are not the same things. To try to imply that these are the same things is hilariously naive. This is really stupid.
Being run together. First of all, on the subject of whether everybody has the equal ability to take entrepreneurial risk,
easy.
I think that it's really interesting that in your example, you said, oh, you can take out a second.
Man, and Ben could have leveraged this actually so well. It's really great that you bring up taking out a second mortgage on your home. Charlie, between black people and white people, who do you think has more wealth tied up in their houses? Who do you think owns more homes? Who do you think is more likely to have a home, right? So right there, off of your housing thing, you've got white people are far more likely to be able to start a business by leveraging their home than black people, right? Like you could have even, there's somebody play, but what Charlie Kirk here is saying is so stupid. It's the first thing he said that's like truly, truly, truly stupid. One thing that I like about debating deep as opposed to debating wide, okay? Most debates are very wide, okay? Like, what do you think about healthcare? Healthcare should be free for everybody. Don't you think it's better to have choice? Yeah, but like, don't you think we should, don't you think instead that like everybody should have access to things like, okay, well, what do you think about like the government helping people start businesses? Well, don't you think that like anybody should be able to start a business? Anybody can start a business, just get a mortgage on the house. But not everybody has that. Okay, maybe. What do you think about like foreign policy, right? You don't actually go in on any topic. You only hit these like top level talking points. This is like 95% of political discourse. You hit these like top level talking points on like every conversation topic, and you never actually drill down into anything. It's like, okay, wait, why not? How about we actually resolve, like, let's get to some bedrock disagreement here and actually resolve your differences instead of just like, kind of like hammering your rhetoric on every topic and then just because like nobody's actually arguing anything here, nobody's being convinced anything here. Like why not just like say like get to the actual disagreement, you know?
Mortgage on your home. So what does that suggest? That you own a home and your finances are generally good enough that would be approved. Which
wait, it's very hard to go deep. Even you don't have very many answers for 50% of my questions you read. Wait, what? Stock. Destiny, you always go hard on people who are not expecting cops. I would think when a cop is too aggressive, that would be a big no, but when a person is slow to react and fucking up, it's normal. I don't think I even necessarily disagree with you here. Cops have more training than people do. Don't you think we should expect more from cops with training than people who don't have training? Yeah, of course. But I can still have a reasonable expectation of a person to like listen to a cop when they give an instruction. I don't think that you need training to do that. Don't you think we should expect more from cops with training than people? Yeah, I think I've even explicitly said this before, that like in certain scenarios, you would have a higher expectation on the cop to de-escalate than necessarily another person, depending on the scenario, because cops are trained for it. If you ever want to talk about why a lot of your cop takes have been dog shit recently, oh, okay. Recently? Okay, I understand where you're coming from now. The U.S. is amazing at keeping inflation in check. Destiny, no one does it because it makes their party look bad and lose votes. Have you been in contact with traditional Republican arguments recently? Do you believe the myth that the U.S. infrastructure is behind the global West? The myth that the U.S. infrastructure is behind the global West. I guess it feels to me like that is the case. But when I think of infrastructure, I'm thinking of just like general, like our streets and everything in America is so disgustingly, horribly bad. Like, I don't know if I've ever driven on any European or New Zealand road that is anywhere near what roads are like in Omaha, Nebraska, or here in LA. I'm sure they must exist in Europe somewhere. They must be. Maybe Eastern Europe or Southeast Europe, maybe. I'm sure there are bad roads in Europe somewhere. But like Western Europe, like Scandinavia, like bro, these roads, like on the Autobahn or whatever, you're not driving, 200 kilometers an hour on an interstate that's got potholes deeper than, the fucking Gulf of New Mexico like you do in the Midwest, So I don't know. It feels like infrastructure is fucked in the U.S. compared to European countries, at least insofar as like roads. I've heard it repeated oftenly that like maintenance on bridges and everything is really bad too. Here's also something that's interesting, super anecdotal, super ultra anecdote. Warning, anecdote warning coming up. Okay, my dad has lost 3 tires to potholes in Omaha. I lost a wheel once to a fucking pothole in Omaha. I had to get my wheel cracked. Okay, not the rubber tire, but the actual fucking, you call it a rim or whatever. My wheel cracked on a fucking pothole. On my shitty little Dodge Neon, driving I-80, coming back west into Omaha from Council Bluffs when I used to work at the casino. Fuck that bullshit. Fuck, what was I saying? Oh, this is so weird to me, okay? This is the weirdest fucking shit in the world, okay? I almost don't even believe it. Every single time I walked by a construction site in Stockholm, okay? Now, okay, a lot of Americans in chat are going to accuse me of lying, okay? You're going to say, bullshit, Destiny. This is impossible. But I'm here to tell you. Okay? I'm about to give you some reality. Every single time I walked near a construction site in Stockholm, there were actually workers on site working. I'm not even lying. I'm not joking. I'm not even lying to you. Every time. And I'd be like, Melina, is that normal over there? Like, who are those people? And she's like, construction workers. I'm like, what are they doing on the job site? Are you serious? No fucking way. Wait, what? There's like 3 different sites. There's people on all these sites working. No fucking way. Dude, I don't know what it is in the United States. I don't know if it was just my area in Nebraska, or I'm trying to think if I've seen it as much in California. Dude, when shit goes under construction in the US, shit is in construction for like 8 months, okay? There will be like one section of road, okay, where they need to move a fucking turtle. And you gotta have 42 different permits from the city, state, the local municipalities. You gotta fucking petition the president of the United States to pardon whatever fucking thing you need. It's like unbelievable how much shit you have to do in the United States to do any construction. It's unbelievable. Like, I don't know, but maybe that was just like that's super anecdotal. Maybe construction is different in other places, or maybe they have their problems too, and I just happen to run into workers. Jesus. Just to be clear, it's not the workers' fault, right? No, hold on. When I say construction people like on the site working, I don't mean they're just standing around being lazy. I mean, in America, usually they're empty. I've heard this. I don't know if this is true, okay? So I'm just repeating what I've heard. I've heard that in the US, oftentimes what happens is because the set time for construction on these sites is so long, companies will just relentlessly bid on the contracts. And even if it's a job that could get done in 2 months, it's rated for 6. So they'll just bid on a fuck ton of contracts to win the bids, and then they just leave the sites empty until they're like ready to get around to it. I've heard that is the case. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but
obviously is a situation that tens of millions of Americans are not in.
So I think we're coming to a good disagreement here.
But also, I would say that when you talk about entrepreneurial risk, you say, well, it's not reasonable to say that workplaces where the people who are making decisions don't have any sort of democratic accountability to the overall workforce, that's not authoritarian because people, in some cases, certainly not all cases, got in that position by taking entrepreneurial risk. I think that there are 2 different issues that are being conflated there, which is one, is
this guy in the back self-destruct?
Right?
Should I be focusing him?
The structure of the firm. And the second is
they
it
took the job
justified
voluntarily?
Because
they weren't stormed out of the house and put a gun to their head and say, now you must go work for Home Depot.
They
showed up and filled out a job application and wanted and hoped to get the job.
You can see. It's transparent. It's called sacrificial.
Are there examples where that is the case, where they're
it does damage when he gets to position 1.
Applies to agreeing to work at a company that's a closed shop, and so your contract specifies that you have to join the union. Nobody forced them at gunpoint to go apply for that job at a closed shop. That they could, if they want to find an open shop where they don't have to join a union, good luck to them. They could find it.
No, I agree with that you can go work for a non-union shop, but you cannot be a public sector teacher in the state of California without being part of the National Education Association.
But you just said public. You just said public sector teacher. You could be a private sector teacher. So how is it that these
I agree,
people,
but why should the taxpayer subsidize a union project?
Well, I think that what the taxpayers are subsidizing is, first of all, a better quality of education.
You think public schools are superior to private schools?
I think that Finland has some of the best schools.
No, America. You think public?
No. But I mean, like Finland and America aren't like such radically different societies.
Of course they are. One is 7 million people, one is 335 million people.
Okay, wait a second.
What does that mean? Is it not scalable? Is there one school in America and one school in Finland? What does that even mean?
Is it that what works at 7 million in this case is not going to work with the 300 and some million?
I could name a lot of examples.
Why? Do it.
First of all, we have way more different cultures. We have a different state-based model. And let me just say this one thing. First of all, Sweden has full school choice, and 1 in 5 families in Sweden send their kids to private school.
I think in Sweden, they tried the flame spreads. Wait, okay, I need to kill this guy. Didn't they try voucher shit in Sweden and it failed? I feel like I've read an article on this multiple times because they asked this question and I'll go read it over and over again.
We could talk about Scandinavia as much as we want. But anyway, let's go back.
I think
we've digressed into that.
But which country has better schools, Finland or Sweden?
Finland has the best schools in the world.
No private schools. So
and they also have very strict immigration.
What
does that have to do with anything?
Why? But I think that you have.
Wait, what does that have to do with anything? When some of the best students in America are fucking immigrants. I'm sorry. Wait, do you think the average Native American, native to the United States person, is outcompeting Chinese fucking people here for school? What do you even mean when you say that? What a brain dead statement.
But I think that. That you are going to get a better quality of education when people are less precarious. They can really commit to it. They have they're getting paid more, so you're going to attract better applicants. And also, I think that the teachers count too. I think that teachers deserve to have those things, and I'm all in favor of it. But the larger point was, if you're going to say that something isn't unfree,
or
if nobody's
autocratic,
forcing you at gunpoint to do it, then that should apply just as much to your objections to contracts that make people join unions.
So I want to go back. I'm going to talk about unions in circles.
Okay. Okay.
I think if you want to join a union, fine, go ahead. Public sector unions are not given that sort of choice. And by the way, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, warned us about public sector unions. He said all government employees should realize that the process of collective bargaining, as usually understood, cannot be transplanted into public service. He warned about the public sector union differentiation between private sector union differentiation. But I want to zero in on this, because I think we have a really interesting point philosophically.
Okay.
Do you think if someone takes a risk in America, they should be able to keep the reward?
Not entirely, no. I mean, you don't think entirely. I mean, like, the only way you could think entirely is if you were an anarchist and you didn't think that we should.
But what are the limitations on that then?
I mean, again, I think that the question that you want to ask, if the question is some transfer of wealth justified? Because I think that's the real question, right? When are transfers of wealth justified? And I think that you need to go back to what are the principles that justify what you think a distribution of wealth in the first place should be. Now, you could think that whatever kind of distribution you get, letting the chips fall where they may in a free market, that's what's justified. I don't think that. I think that the distribution of wealth that we have, and I think taxation and redistribution, even in the sort of market socialist system that I was advocating earlier, I think you'd still need those things. But I think that the distribution of wealth that's justified is the one that would emerge from a social contract that people would agree to under certain circumstances.
So,
I'm trying to post a comment debunking Voucher statement on pizza delivery driver deaths compared to cop deaths on his recent upload of his panel last night. It keeps getting deleted. Could this be an automated thing from YouTube? Probably.
Have you seen the trailer for Tucker Carlson's 1/6 documentary?
Nope.
They're afraid the left/FBI will go after militant right-wing groups by COINTELPRO because it did it in the past.
Wow, interesting.
I guess it all comes down to numbers, I guess.
Well, no, I mean that's this isn't a claim about numbers. This is a claim about basic moral principles.
But
I think that the question is, if you were, the best version of something like contract theory, if you were behind John Rawls's veil of ignorance,
which I totally reject.
Sure, I mean, of course you totally reject it, Charlie.
I'm happy to get into the Rawlsian theory of justice.
You couldn't believe any of the things that you believed if you didn't reject it. But I think that.
But I'm going to ask you about the veil of ignorance in a second.
If you're asking about what I think, I don't think that there's some magic number that, like, oh, you can tax up to this, you can't tax.
You shouldn't have burned the bridge. Burned what bridge? Who is this?
Whether a tax system is just, and generally a system of how property works is just, you should ask, if you knew that you had to live in the society, but you didn't know who you're going to be in the society, would you agree to it? And the same way that if you didn't know whether you were going to be black or white, you wouldn't agree to racial discrimination being part of the rules of your society. If you didn't know whether you're going to be born into a poor family or a rich one, if you didn't know whether you have the particular skills that help you climb
Kelly
up
Jenner friend. Oh, me and Kelly are cool now, okay? We made up. We're best friends now.
If you didn't know any of those things, how would you want the rules of society to work?
I have an answer.
And I think that's going to be the answer that's going to tell you when redistribution of wealth is justified.
I would want the rules of society to value action over favoritism, hard work over complacency, family creation over licentiousness, right? Liberty and the pursuit of virtue. Those things are right and wrong regardless of what veil of ignorance, if I would be born in a lower class or a higher class. Those things are objectively good. So to use Rawls' own thought experiment.
So you talked about hard work there.
Yes.
So if you
industriousness,
have a basic value to industriousness, if you have a basic objection to people getting things that you don't work for, here are two things that you should be against.
Okay.
Inheritance and stock ownership.
So let's talk about both of them. Stock ownership, you might be able to get me to agree. Inheritance, I think, is really cliche. Why do most people take big risks to create wealth? Which also goes to this question, how is wealth created?
Wealth is created by workers. Those are the ones who create wealth. No. The straw man that people usually trot out at this point in the argument is they say, when you say workers are creating wealth, you're saying that there's a one-to-one how hard you work, to how much wealth is created. And of course, there are a million other factors that decide it. But everything that's being done, whether you're talking about ideas, which, by the way, big companies, that's going to be workers in the R&D department, much more than CEOs in most of those cases, or whether you're talking about who is making the products, who is selling the products. Those are the people. Who are creating it. And I would say, if you want to say that the only incentive that you can get, that you cannot have a thriving, dynamic economy without people being able to leave millions of dollars to
the store canceled your order and we issued a refund
to their descendants, then I would say that it's very confusing. First of all, that even within traditional capitalist companies, you have plenty of childless people who are motivated to do that.
No, I think that's totally true.
But secondly, that you have cases like Mondragon, that you have very economically effective worker cooperatives. Nobody is creating some giant pile of wealth that they'll be able to pass on to their descendants, but people are still motivated to work, and these companies can still be very successful.
And look, you might be able to get me to agree on like 500 million, a billion, but again, the reason I wouldn't agree with it,
500 million, not like 5 million.
But like,
you should be able to pass on $5 million.
The reason I don't agree with it is that where's it going to go? To go fund some spy agency so that it go spy
but I was told in
on
NYC
Americans
that city
through
inspectors
some
of bars / restaurants, a time window when they arrive to check if patrons have shown vax proof.
Okay.
The point is that like
if you want to say we should abolish the spy agencies,
but the point is every time that there's this like, would you raise taxes to do this? The default answer is no, because we're funding that money would then be transferred away from some private utility to something that I consider to be a government that is doing a lot of harm and very little good. And so, but I guess there's this question of wealth being created, and we're kind of we're going at this from different angles.
That's a really interesting objection.
But if you would say, hey, it goes to charity instead of the IRS, then I might be able to agree with that, which is what we're doing at this debate, by the way, which goes that, this is so great. I do have a question for you, actually, as a sidebar. Why is it when you challenged me to debate, why didn't you say that all the proceeds would go to the IRS and to a private charity?
I think that...
Does private charity do a better job?
No, I actually don't think that. First of all, the reason the debate hosting website, the way that works, was already there. I have nothing against private charity. I am fine with doing that. I obviously participated in doing that in this case.
Is it preferential to government?
I do not think that private charity can be a substitute for collective government action. I think that the empirical track record is very clear that you're not going to get private charity that's going to be as effective. So, for example, and we also need to talk about what we mean by effective here, because this is a really crucial point. So there are a few different questions. One,
what does this mean, boss?
You going to get, is there some amount of private charity that you could give for medical expenses that's going to get you to a point where our rate of mortality amenable to healthcare is as low as it is in Canada or the UK? I don't think so. I think we've kind of run that experiment. Second point is part of what I mean by effective is giving people freedom and a dignified life in ways that they don't have if they're worried about quitting jobs they hate because they'll lose their health insurance, or if they're doing things like starting GoFundMes to buy their insulin, which means that they have to craft, do you have enough of a tearjerker story that you'll stand out from the other 10,000 GoFundMes?
Don't break the books. I have to break some of the books. I can't get to them.
I think people have far more dignity if they just get these things as rights just by virtue of being part of a society.
Yeah, that's where we're going to totally disagree. Where that private charity not only involves themselves in the person's life to hopefully be able to break them out of their economic circumstances, I would argue it's much more efficient in a variety of different ways. I
think if you
the $500 billion Americans give to charity every single year, I would argue does a far better job of offering a social safety net than the multi-trillions of dollars that we spend.
Is it really $500 billion a year? That's a lot of money. How much money annual Americans donate charity? $471 billion in 2020. Jesus. I wonder where the majority of this comes from. Does this include all the work that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation does? So foundations gave $88 billion. Oh, the largest came from individuals at $324 billion. Oh, 28% went to religion, 15% to education. Still quite a bit. Good job, America.
On social welfare
wait a second.
in a variety of different ways.
How about the $500 billion we spend on charity? Take the part of it that's spent, for example, on healthcare, and compare that to comparable, economically comparable countries where healthcare is provided as a right to everybody outside of the market. Which one does a better job? America, where you have to, if you don't have health insurance and you don't qualify, for Medicaid or Medicare, you have to beg on GoFundMe. Or countries like Canada and the UK, which it seems like, by all the obvious metrics, who lives longer, who has a lower rate of infant mortality, who has a lower rate of mortality amenable to healthcare, all of those obvious metrics, it seems like those government healthcare programs do way better.
You won't hear me bragging on many aspects of the American healthcare system. Many of it is very cronyistic and corrupt. But to say we're not spending government money on it is just not.
Well, did I say that?
No, but you're implying it. I mean, we're spending.
I don't think I said or implied.
We have trillions and trillions of dollars we spend on government-run healthcare.
Sure, I think it would actually be vastly more efficient if you look at how much is being spent. For what results? I don't think there's any question that Canada and the UK are getting way more bang for their buck in terms of government spending on healthcare.
So the UK has a total, so you would have the government take over hospitals?
Yeah, ultimately I think that would be better.
Wow.
I don't think...
Wow.
So where would medical innovation come from?
Well, medical innovation would come from...
Holy shit, S-Fan called you on our stream. Did you burn the bridge with him? Is this going to be a dumb meme bait? Because if it is, somebody's getting a big ban among us.
Hello.
Two-day ban for a dumb.
What is this?
Exactly where it comes from right now, which is mostly the public sector. If you look at pharmaceuticals, this is really good. I really like this argument because this is something people often trot out in defense of private health insurance. Well, you need that, so you have these incentives to develop pharmaceuticals. If you're looking at NMEs,
not just pharmaceuticals, treatments,
right? new molecular.
Oh God, I thought he
entities,
just killed one of my people instantly.
Which are genuinely new drugs, not just you tweak it a little bit and you slap your corporate brand on it. 75% of those are developed already in government-funded labs. I think this idea that there's a lot of private innovation in there, I think is at the very least.
Oh God, that's such a dog shit argument.
Wildly overstated. I think that you can absolutely have healthcare innovation without it being the case that within hospitals or when people need to pay for treatment, you have this element of private profit, which I think has been a disaster in the healthcare system.
Do you think there's a reason why America has the highest quality healthcare, not for the most amount of people, but the highest quality healthcare in the world? Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that
that is inarguable. If you can afford it, it is the best healthcare on the planet.
Sure. I mean, if something is that if you can skip to the head of the line by having enough money, then absolutely, you can get world-class healthcare. But the question I'm interested in is not are well-off people or really well-off people.
But it's a segue to my next question.
Well, okay, but the question I'm interested in is not are they going to have better healthcare than the average person in Canada or the UK. What I'm interested in is the average person in the United States going to have a better experience with the healthcare system and have better healthcare outcomes than those other systems deliver? And that's just inarguable
so the question,
that they have better outcomes and better experiences.
How do you get something that a few people have to have a lot of people have? More government intervention or market forces applied that allow things to be cheaper and faster delivered and better delivered? Market forces do a better job for that all the time, whether it be in technology or transportation.
I think that there's a structural reason why market forces are not going to be as effective in healthcare as they are going to be in many other areas. And that structural reason is not some special radical Marxist thing that I think. That structural reason is something that you'll find in your wildly pro-capitalist neoclassical Econ 101 textbook, which is that supply and demand are going to do a much better job of shaping things in the direction of consumer preferences for things that are pretty elastic. You drive past one gas station, you see, that looks a little bit too expensive. You drive a few blocks more, you get to another gas station. Those market forces are going to do a much better job of delivering for the consumer there than in cases like health insurance, which is wildly inelastic. For one thing, if you need heart surgery, you will pay any amount that is in your power to get it, for the same reason that if we didn't have, public fire services, it was just like in ancient Rome where like Crassus would like go around with slaves with buckets of water and offer to buy people's homes, for his prior service spread out. Yeah, people are going to sell for whatever price you're going to pay in those circumstances. People are going to pay whatever you're demanded to get heart surgery. And even when it comes to less dramatic uses of the health insurance system, like just, let's say all you need from the healthcare system is once every 90 days, you need your doctor to sign off on some prescription you've been on for 10 years, it's still a giant stressful pain to switch providers that, you have to find somebody.
And I'm not defending every detail of the American system.
The point isn't about the details. The point is that this is a structural reason that our demand for healthcare is way less elastic than our demand for other consumer goods.
The American healthcare system,
which means that market forces are going to be less effective there.
Market, though. We don't have price transparency. We have an oligarchy of the hospitals. We don't have health savings accounts in most states. We don't allow health insurance across state lines. Now, while I agree that there is that at times there can be externalities of where the profit motive is not a perfect fit, where it's like, oh, I want to go buy a t-shirt. Like, okay, yeah, I have leukemia. Like, that's not the same thing. I get that. Where the charts and the graphs can't explain all of that. And that generally the best fit line, though, of market principles can help for the vast majority of things that are not in that 10% category of life-saving treatments. Because, and you know this, the vast majority of people going to the doctor are not like, I have a gunshot wound, I have leukemia or cancer.
That's what I just said.
No,
though.
I know, but market forces in those cases, you could agree, could be very, very instructive and very helpful.
Well,
empowering the consumer and price transparency and bringing down prices.
So I think that here are the things that we know. That as a matter of fact, market forces are right now, we could argue about the diagnosis, but right now, they are creating lousy outcomes
I would argue
in the American healthcare system.
We hardly have market forces in most healthcare. But most hospitals are nonprofit, government-run agencies.
This is what it sounds like to me.
Is that true? Are most hospitals nonprofit or government-run in the United States?
This sounds like nothing so much as some ultra-leftists saying, well, look, sure, Soviet economic planning had a lot of problems, but that's because it wasn't communist enough. They still had money.
I'm arguing that
because if we look at the systems that actually exist, then the United States has one of the most marketized healthcare systems in the entire world, and certainly relative to developed rich countries, we have some of the worst outcomes. And if you want to say, well, if we made it even marketized, more marketized, we would actually have better outcomes than all of the systems
in certain aspects
that are socialized. I think that's a leap of faith.
Let me give you a great example. So you want to empower regular people, consumers. Would you agree that there should be a federal law to mandate hospitals publicly publish their prices, price transparency?
Yeah, sure, I'm all for that.
Okay, that's a market fix. We want people to have the information, because what they have right now is they're driving down the street, they don't even see the gas prices. They don't even know what price anything is. And so that's just an example of how hospitals, and being kind of this oligopoly of nonprofit profit mixture, which is incredibly corrupt, that they are hiding behind this idea to not empower the consumer. What I'm saying, and I think there's some middle ground here, that we want to empower patients to know, like, wait a second, you're going to charge me $45 for a Tylenol? Like, that's dumb.
Yeah, I agree that price transparency would be better, but what would be even better?
And by the way, that's not every conservative agrees with me. Some are like, they can do whatever they want. I think that's silly.
Okay, well, that's good. Put that alongside the progress on the Bezos,
on Hunter Biden, Jeff Bezos, and price transparency, right? So I don't want to spend all of our time on healthcare, but yes, there's so much more I want to get to.
Sure, but let me say one last thing about that. What would be even better than having transparency on what you're getting, what you're paying for things that you badly need, which doesn't have to be as dramatic as a gunshot wound. Insulin is something that people badly need. Psychiatric medication is often something that people badly need, and if they get off it, without proper medical, circumstances, that's going to be a disaster for them. That what would be even better than price transparency is not treating those things as commodities. And if we look at the systems in the world today, the ones that seem to do a lot better, at the very least, go much further in the opposite direction.
I'm not going to get into waiting lines in Canada or any of that, because some of that stuff is very...
I'd be really happy to get into it.
Some of that is very much disputed, and quite honestly, I'm not prepared to go into that as much, so I just kind of want to...
Okay, I would say...
I do want to... I'll let you have one comment on that, because I'm not...
Sure. One comment.
And I'll allow people to do their own research on Canadian waiting lines, but yes.
Sure. I think that if you want to talk about Canadian waiting lines,
healthcare rationing, because it's not unlimited, therefore you have to prioritize
sure,
who gets it, right?
No healthcare system is unlimited. But the question is always, if there's a limit, what is the principle that you use to decide?
That's interesting. What would you say that is?
Who gets
the
it?
youngest?
And I would say that absolutely the worst way to do it is for it to be made not by doctors, making decisions about, okay, what do we think is going to pay off?
The same doctors that believe the coronavirus is real?
How long can we keep this person alive versus, like any of those things. The worst way to do it is to ration it by money, which is what we do. So what I think about Canadian waiting lines is there is some truth to it. There are some things.
Thank you for saying that. Not everyone says that, so I agree.
That you do have longer wait times for.
I appreciate you saying
I don't think it's as dramatic as people say it is.
You might be right.
When you start looking at
I hear
numbers,
both
but
sides.
there are some things that you have longer waiting times for. But I think that part of the reason you have longer waiting times is that more people are in line. We don't exclude people from the line because they can't afford it. And I think as a matter of basic human rights, that's good not to exclude people from the line. And two, if the reason we're worried about it is because we think that people will die waiting, I think we can look at all the statistics comparatively between the United States and Canada. And I know a lot of people want to say that all of that's just lifestyle stuff. But I grew up right by the Canadian border in Michigan. All the Canadians I know.
In the Upper Peninsula?
No, in the Lower Peninsula, but I actually had to drive south to get to the nearest Canadian border, Detroit, Windsor.
Oh, wow. Okay, you were near the Canadian border.
And all the Canadians I know love beer and hockey and Tim Hortons donuts. I don't think that the reason that they have these better healthcare outcomes.
Nobody in Canada likes Tim Hortons anymore, by the way.
Is that they're that much healthier than Americans.
It's been corrupted.
And certainly I think the infant mortality differences, the lifestyle of infants is very similar everywhere. They just kind of lie there. And you could say there are certain factors, parent behaviors that create differences there. But I think even there, like way more Brits smoke than Americans. The rate of drinking is higher.
That is definitely true.
I think that and those are the things that are most immediately going to impact that. And then especially, I think the one you're going to have the hardest time explaining is mortality amenable to healthcare. Because
let me just make my position clear. Yeah. Why I think some of your critiques are actually very valid and helpful. Where you totally lose me is government takeover of hospitals. And because, let me ask you a question.
Okay, can we at least do government takeover of insurance?
Well, let's do it hospitals, because that really is the question, right?
Sure.
So let me just ask you a question.
Okay.
Because I didn't want to spend this much time on it, but now you've got me interested.
Yeah.
Do you think the VA works well?
So I think that I would say two things about that. So the first is that if you actually look at surveys of people, and sometimes defenders of private health insurance love to do that because they say, hey, look at these surveys where most people say they're happy.
Most people are happy with the VA. I think that is true.
I think that's very unclear what that means, or do you think, does that mean that you're happier with it than you would be with not having to pay for it and actually saving money like most people would with Medicare for All, even according to the Mercatus Institute? But like the people who are most likely to say that they're happy with it are seniors on Medicare and veterans and active duty military personnel who are the ones who are living under the British system. But are there cases where people have to wait way too long for certainly like psychiatric care?
Do you see where I'm getting? I'm saying this in good faith. The VA is a mess in a lot of circumstances.
But I think that, and I think that unfortunately there's a cycle sometimes where conservatives are successful in getting funding for things cut or certainly not increased the way it should be, and then they use the results of that to undermine it. But I think one big difference, if you accept, for the sake of argument, that despite those surveys that I just gave, that overall it's way worse, then the question is, what's the difference between the NHS in Britain and the VA? And I think that the biggest difference, why the NHS has all these great outcomes, certainly compared to the US healthcare system, I think the difference is that the NHS is for everybody. Only a small minority of Americans are veterans, so what goes on in the VA is not really something that's on most people's radar most of the time.
Let me ask you another question.
So there's a lot less political incentive to care about it.
Usually, typically, in urban areas, are the county-run hospitals the best?
I'm sure they're not. They have because I think that oftentimes they're severely underfunded. It's certainly.
You get what I'm getting at here, though.
So I get what you're getting at, but
hospitals are usually a disaster.
But I think the question is, why let's accept that, right? Like I'm certainly not going to pretend like I have a bunch of stats that are memorized.
Yeah, and even let's just use Atlanta. The Emory Hospital is way better than
on county.
And I could say for personal experience, it's just the Emory Hospital is far superior to just county.
But here's what I think is the more relevant point of comparison: not when it's a municipality, which is often cash-starved in general. And it's going to be, I think, actually much less efficient than doing it federally.
But they do receive a lot of federal money, a ton of federal money.
But why is it then that you think that in Britain or in some Scandinavian countries where most hospitals are publicly owned, their healthcare outcomes are so much better?
That's a very fair question. I have my own personal opinions of it. Not every healthcare outcome is better. We have a higher cancer survivability rate for certain sort of treatments.
Certain cancers, it's very, 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 very small. There's like a couple, it's like pancreatic. There's like 1 or 2 cancers that America does better in, but this is, for the most part, our healthcare outcomes are not better, especially given how much money we pay on healthcare.
People that conjecture in the healthcare field, it could be because of many different underlying health conditions of how obese America is, where we are more obese than these other comparable countries, also our diet, nutrition. But it's going to be difficult to kind of pinpoint a cause.
Academic
if
study.
your argument
is
it's because that the government is running it, I reject the argument simply and totally because I know the government runs almost nothing efficiently and correctly. But I guess that's the crux of the argument that you're saying.
That seems
that you're trying to sell me that in a multivariate analysis, you put all those other things aside. That it's because some guys on government payroll.
I don't put all those things aside. We just went through a detailed argument about why this is a more plausible explanation. Now it's fine to be not convinced by that argument.
Yeah.
But I think
Roblox has been offline for over 60 hours. Is that true?
I'm just dismissing everything else rather than giving you reasons why those explanations make a lot less sense. I mean, what is the biggest difference between the U.S. and Canada? What's the biggest difference between the United States and the United Kingdom? It's not that we're much healthier, as you say.
Why is my party
a lot
shuffled?
of things that are relevant here, like drinking, are actually
we are a little bit more obese.
Or actually, a little bit more. But if you look at it, I don't think it's dramatic enough to make this the big distinction. And also, I think the healthcare outcomes where you think they, look, 36% obesity is worse than 30% obesity, but I don't think that's going to explain everything we're talking about.
That's a big deal.
Sure. I mean, I am all in favor.
And I will say this.
We can talk about what
you'll agree with
this.
If you want to think, if I want to go to the final thing that we'll agree on with this, the biggest difference is, I think, the preying pharmaceutical companies in our country.
Well, that is certainly one important
difference.
But
let's put the hospital thing aside and delivery of care and all that stuff.
I was just going to say that.
I think pharmaceutical companies have, and so I'm just going to say this, because I think it actually is the best argument to say that market principles, and I would have made this argument if I were you, but you didn't. That's okay.
Well, I mean,
but you kind of did. I'll just say that, like, if you're Pfizer, the money is in the middle of keeping someone not healed, but keeping back as an annuity to keep buying your drug. Right? And this comes as someone who can't stand the major pharmaceutical companies that tries to be more homeopathic and kind of solutions in all of this, where conservatives don't talk about that enough. If there was a difference, I would say that AstraZeneca, I don't even know if AstraZeneca is an American company, but Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and BioNTech, which was originally an Israeli company.
List, but
but those are the vaccine manufacturers.
Yeah. Which, by the way, is a perfect example of what I'm talking about with the pharmaceutical companies, because most of that research was government funded.
Oh, you're such a slimy piece of shit. But neither of them will fight on this.
Might have had questionable outcomes. We'll see. So,
Kirk is anti-vaccine,
That's too much fun for right now. Let me ask you another.
The point I was trying to make, just for the record, is the outcomes where you say that the U.S. is better.
And not every metric, but it's fair. I'm not defending the U.S. healthcare system. I'm not their defense attorney, right?
I understand you're not defending.
Because we can go to Singapore, we can go to other places that have.
Damn, he just keeps. Kirk just keeps going and going.
Decentralized. Well, they're more economically free. But again, I'm not a defense lawyer for the American healthcare system.
Singapore's healthcare system is like Obamacare and
But trying to convince the American public, what you're trying to do is say, hey, let's nationalize the hospitals, nationalize the private industry, private insurance, which is what you eventually want to get to do, is obviously done on arrival with me, and I think a majority of Americans, for a good reason.
Sure, but what I was going to say was those metrics where you say that we do better are things that I think a big part of the reason that we're going to do better on those is those aren't about overall outcomes for everybody. They're about specific kinds of services that not everybody's going to get in the first place. And that goes back to what we were saying earlier, that sure, if you can afford it, Absolutely.
So yeah,
best anywhere.
The final thing I'll say, because I want to get on these other topics.
Okay,
Sure.
final thing.
We
Yeah.
know how to get things cheaper and better, and that's usually market forces with some externalities being handled. So I'll give you one example. We might agree on Hunter Biden, Bezos, price transparency, and I don't think pharmaceutical companies should be allowed to advertise. I think it's the weirdest thing ever. They're running, ask your doctor about this. Like, if you need it, then your doctor should tell you about it. You shouldn't be propagandized by the
Sure.
pharmaceutical
I have to
companies.
If you're
fight
asking
here?
your
All right,
doctor if
fourth-
this is right for you.
fourth
that's
thing.
that's
And nobody
a
wants to fight? Are you serious?
I agree.
But I think that
I totally agree.
but I
because
think,
it hurts the family. All right, so I want to get to this next thing because we can keep on going in circles about all this, which is, okay, this could go forever, and we'll wrap it up eventually, I promise. Do you believe in absolute truth?
Oh my God.
sure. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just interested.
I mean, do you? Let me make sure I understand what you're asking. Right?
Yes.
So, when you say absolute truth, do you just mean that whether things in general about any subject are true or false?
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at, and I hate to use like the cliche
Sure.
word, is would you consider yourself a postmodernist? That truth is relative.
No, absolutely
Okay.
not.
So that's good. Do you think that postmodernism and that kind of movement is harmful or helpful to the American left?
Oh my God.
I think it's harmful. I don't.
That's
think,
interesting.
I don't think,
Elaborate.
Wait, what?
That.
I don't think we should believe in alternative facts any more than anybody else should. I think that what's
I agree with you.
true is I think that what's true, generally speaking, it depends a little bit, what we're talking about, and I'm not saying the only reason I'm saying
Like
that is
Newtonian physics, like
is
force
just that-
equals mass
sure,
time acceleration,
Sure.
right?
Well, yeah. I mean,
Why would your go-to example for absolute truth be Newtonian physics? Why, of all the things you could say, why would you choose the one thing that's not true? I don't understand. How strange.
I mean, technically, Newtonian physics is a good enough approximation for like mid-sized dry goods. The real stuff is like quantum physics, relativistic physics.
Of course, but you understand what I'm saying.
But I understand what you're saying, and I agree. Right? Absolutely. I think that truth is objective. I think if you want to get into an argument about who in practice, who has political power, is actually denied that, more than others.
I don't think there'll actually be much fruit in that discussion.
Then we could get
Give
into
me
that.
fruit, baby.
If your question is whether truth is objective, then I think it is. I did, if I could slip one in.
Sure. You can ask me questions too.
It is a little bit it's a little bit off the track of most of what we've been talking about, but I have been wondering about this, right?
Sure.
Because I have seen I've seen some of your previous debates, and something's come up at a couple of them. It's not a
Is it force times mass equals
more
force equals mass times exertion not true anymore? No, it's just the idea, like Newtonian physics is like an approximation of the universe. It doesn't quite work out at different like scopes, which is why quantum mechanics is like subsumed and then superseded all of what we knew before in like Newtonian physics, except for we don't know how to explain gravity at all yet, which is a big hole. But
Physics?
Okay,
there you go.
It's more about a physical question. I've seen you make this claim that you'll say things like, well, there's no social contract, our rights come from God.
Yes.
So first thing is, could you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by that?
Yeah, just as the founders did, as they said in the Declaration, the laws of nature and nature's God, where whether you believe it's an actual being of a triune God like I would, or kind of more of a deistic.
Isn't it possible that you can think objective reality is real, but postmodernism is helpful? Okay, my understanding, first of all, oh my God, Destiny, please stop with the bad physics takes. Wait, ninja physics, what did I just say that was incorrect? You go, type, or you're IP banned. I'm actually not fucking right. You're gonna get perma banned. Please just don't talk about physics. What did I just say that was incorrect? Go, or you're banned. Go ahead. And if it's like, I was just memeing, I don't care. You're getting banned. You can go to DGG or YouTube chat. Go ahead. I think that broadly speaking, so there's not like a one thing that is like postmodern, right? Like there are different people, I think like Foucault, that get called postmodern. They're like, no, I'm not postmodern, fuck you, right? I think the idea behind modernism, this like trend of thought was just the idea that we can like categorize things as being like objectively true or making progress in these areas. It's just like this mode of thought that like we can measure objectively, like through objective truth, like progress in society and shit. And then I think like postmodern thought like questions that. Well, are we actually making progress? Like these things that you call objective truths, are they really objective, or are they more relative to like different contexts and different like sets of facts or whatever, basically? But so it's like a very broad thing to just say like, oh, postmodernism sucks. It's like, it's really strange because like that's like a really broad thing. It's like saying like, oh, like I like all of modernism, or I hate all of postmodernism, or I like it just doesn't. It's just kind of a weird thing to say. I think it's like a really broad school of thought. It's I don't even know if you'd call it. I don't even know if you'd say postmodernism is like a school of thought. Like it's just a really dumb. Where's the physics guy? What did he say? Quantum, so this guy in chat said, quantum doesn't accurately describe macro objects. Newtonian physics approximates what, I've never heard that in my life. My understanding is that every single idea or thought that we have around physics, I think save for gravity, has been subsumed by quantum mechanics. That everything can be, you don't have to switch back and forth over and over again. It's not called quantum mechanics because it only deals with small things. Where's the ninja physics guy? Did he say anything, or? Or so the quantum mechanists would like us to think. Okay, true. Okay, ninja physics got banned. Fuck you. He didn't say anything. You don't use QM for lots of large-scale calculations. It's quite difficult to model. Yeah, sure. Maybe you might not because approximations work. But my understanding is that like everything in like quantum mechanics and everything in like general relativity, all of these things have completely subsumed Newtonian physics. Like all of that has been accounted for more or less. I believe Newton is comprised by relativity and string theory is trying to connect quantum with... All right, okay, no, we're not doing this. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there's still a crossover between when things become large enough that they no longer act quantum mechanically, or there are some properties that can be arbitrarily large and others can't. It's not understood where the crossover occurs. Fuck, I need more. We had one physicist in chat, but he turned anti-fan and left. I don't know. We'll find another. I have a BSc in physics. We haven't fully recovered classical mechanics via quantum yet. That's insanely complicated. I thought coagulation of Zerg, I thought wait, I just 100% disagree with the idea that Newton is wrong. QM and GR didn't overturn Newton. I thought QM and GR are literally like a literal paradigm shift. I thought Newton is just wrong, but it works for approximations, but it doesn't describe the underlying like reality correctly. I'm almost positive that that's correct. Isn't quantum gravity not a thing? Like we want it desperately to be a thing, but it isn't yet. No, I don't think there is a, oh, fuck. I need the physics guy here to explain this. Because I don't know if I'm right. I don't believe that quantum mechanics, I don't think has an account for gravity yet. But general relativity does. That's the whole space-time, blankets, boobs, and all that shit, right? You roll a marble in a, right? Because I think space-time is like the explanation for gravity, but I don't think there's a quantum account of that yet. But I thought that everything classically has been subsumed at this point by QM and relativity. I thought that was the case. Is that not true? Are there things classically that we don't have an account for yet or can't explain? Newton's theory of gravity works fine at or near the Earth's surface. Yeah, and saying that your dick is 3 inches long is an okay approximation, but in reality, it's probably like 3.01 inches or 3.05 inches or something, right? The idea is that those aren't truth but models. A model cannot be true or false. Sure. Okay, we're finishing this.
God, that you have rights and something gave it to you. And that the social contract that we have recognizes a transcendent order.
So if something
Can I actually say this? I don't know if this is a controversial food take or not. I don't like burritos that you can't take bites out of. When I like, okay, no. Actually, let me quantify this a little bit more. I don't mind huge burritos like this, but what I don't like is when all the rice is stuck in one corner, all the meat is in another corner, and then like when you bite it, there's like different quadrants of like how your burrito is loaded, and it's like, really? I don't know. I don't like that. I don't think it's good.
Gave it to you. I assume that what you mean by something gave it to you.
I would believe an omniscient, omnipotent being, but I'm not proselytizing you to believe
I'm,
right?
I'm not. I don't think you are. I mean, I was the one who brought it up. I'm
Sure.
just curious.
Okay. No.
You know, they had a so if you know, because when you say that something gave it to you, you could read that at least two different ways. So one of them is, which, and I assume this is not what you think, but like, you know, one of them is that like, literally in a cause and effect way, we have certain legal rights because of like the intervention of God. But of course, it's clearly not the case that God is like stopping China from putting dissidents in jail. I assume what you mean is that we morally have a right to those things because God gave it to you.
That's correct, but if you're asking, do I believe that in a God that can intervene supernaturally,
well, sure,
I do.
Sure, you can, but I mean, like
And
as a.
But I'm happy to get into that.
Sure, fair enough, right?
I don't think there'll be much.
I don't think that's actually relevant to the question.
Yeah.
But I'm trust me, whatever else I am, I'm a huge philosophy nerd. I'm always happy to talk about that. But
and I have a question about Christopher Hitchens for you.
Sure, awesome.
Because I know you wrote a book on it.
I did, just finished a couple weeks ago. But I'd like to thank you. But if you say that God is the moral, you know, is the reason why morally we should have these rights.
The unmoved movement.
That I don't understand how that's going to get around like the Euthyphro problem. Like if you say, okay, so Euthyphro, there's this dialogue written by Plato where Socrates is arguing with this ancient Greek holy man named Euthyphro.
Yes.
And they're talking about the definition of holiness. And it's going to take just a second, but I promise I'm going to get through this quickly and we'll get to the point. You know, so they're arguing about the definition of holiness. And Euthyphro says the holy is that which the gods love. And Socrates asks him this simple question.
Uh-oh.
Do the gods love it because it is holy, or is it holy
because the gods love it?
So translate into what we're talking about here, the question would be, is it morally just that, you know, these rights be recognized because that's what God wants, or does God want it because it would be...
Unironically, there's a God-tier dilemma. It gets to, it's an interesting question. Is morality woven into the fabric of the universe and God can interpret that fabric? Or is something moral simply because God says it is? It's an interesting, if you believe in God.
Unjust to deny them, because if you say...
Both.
Okay, well, that's a really interesting answer. Never heard that one before. I want to get into it, but just to finish up with what the problem is, if you say that God wants you to have those rights because it would be morally unjust to deny it to you,
and
then that suggests that it's morally unjust for some reason other than God wanting it, and that the God part, at least on the moral question, is going to be sort of beside the point. That they have that like whatever the reason is why it would be, God thinks it would be unjust, is a reason that's going to be just as available to the atheist or the agnostic. Whereas if you say it's morally unjust because God doesn't want it, and God doesn't have some reason why it would be morally unjust, then it's just like lucky for us, I guess, that God wants us to have free speech and freedom of religion, equal rights for women, because he could just as easily want us to organize a society like the Taliban did.
Right, so a lot to unpack there. I would say both, because through divine revelation and through reason, especially through many of the writings of the early church fathers, you know, we believe in a metaphysical God that not just gave us the law and this interpretation of natural rights because he believes there's a certain way we should live, right? But also because of divine revelation,
it's not Aquinas, it's Aquinas, right? Sorry, I think I always mispronounce his name.
As what is morally just and unjust, right? So believing in the Christian God or the Judeo-Christian God You would reject what the Taliban is doing for a variety of different reasons, right?
So I understand how you can say that through divine revelation, you can figure out.
Oh, was Aquinas right the first time?
And the tradition
I don't remember.
Sure.
Right? And going on Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Aquinas, Augustine.
Well, I mean, this is,
we can go to
we're talking about the Plato's objection to
divine command. I'm happy to go through Aristotle's ethics and metaphysics with you too.
Sure, that sounds fun. Yeah. So I think that I understand how you can say through divine revelation, we find out what God thinks is just or unjust, but that's a slightly different question from what makes it just or unjust.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding your question. Just can you clarify it a little bit?
So
I'm super shocked. It's so bizarre to me, okay? Sometimes I appear to be very smart, and then something is brought up, and people will be like, how do you not know that thing? Well, my answer is because I look up shit and I read about it when it comes up. I don't have like a formal background in these areas. It's really bizarre to me that Charlie Kirk, who claims to have read all these philosophy books and wants to talk about like Plato, Aristotle, Aquinas, how have you not heard this dilemma before? It's like, it is the classic dilemma of like, where does morality come from? Or I think it might even be employed to like disprove that you can get morality from God. This is a super classic dilemma. I don't know anything about philosophy really, truly. And I've heard this like a million times. I feel like you would have always heard this before. It's really, I'm curious if he's actually, how have you read of so many people? You haven't, right? But like, how can you claim to have read so many people and not know about this? That's just, he sounds like he's just name dropping, you know?
So the question is, the question you answer with both is, does God want us to have these rights because it'd be unjust if we didn't have them?
Yes.
Or would it be unjust if we didn't, or is the only reason it would be unjust if we didn't have them because God doesn't want us to have them?
The answer is both, and the answer is in self-evident, is that you can find it both in the Word of God and through self-evident exploration of the natural world.
But those are answers
contradictory.
to the question of how you find out what God wants.
Yes.
But that's a little bit different from saying, why does God want that thing?
Oh, okay, good. God wants us these things because he wants us to live fruitful and multiply, as he says in the scriptures. God does not want us to live oppressively. He doesn't want us to fail or to, in my own biblical theological interpretation, which you can feel free to mock and dismiss. But
trust me,
Jesus.
I'm not going to mock it.
We had a whole fun little thing last night.
I have tremendous respect for Christian socialists like Cornel West or Dr. Martin Luther King.
Well, definitely not going to find me as one of those.
Or to pick a third example of a progressive Christian, just at random, pick one out of the hat,
Jesus.
my wife Jennifer. They have a tremendous respect for all of these people. But
God wants us to live freely.
So if God wants us to live fruitfully,
You should have thrown the Jesus in there.
Be fruitful and multiply.
Sure.
Right?
Okay.
So occupy till I come. Be salt and light throughout every corner of the earth.
Okay. So would it still, if the reason that God wants us to be fruitful, if the reason that God wants us to live, flourishing lives, whatever, is because it's objectively good to live flourishing lives, it would still be, if hypothetically it turned out somehow, right, there was some magic way of checking this, right, that there wasn't a God, it would still be the case that it was objectively morally good to live flourishing lives.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so God's law in our interpretation of natural rights is true regardless if you recognize it's granted by God or not. So I'll give you an example, the Decalogue, right? The 10 commandments or the 10 statements that were given to Moses.
Okay.
If you follow those 10 things as an atheist or Christopher Hitchens fan, you're going to live a good life. Not lying, not stealing, not murdering, honoring your parents, you're not committing adultery. Those are things that are built into the natural law. That's an easy 10 examples to give.
Okay.
Now, but also those things are true if you recognize they're given to by God, of which I believe. So those are both independently true.
So,
damn.
Because you said two things here, and I'm not sure how long we want to spend on this, but just
I'm enjoying it.
But you're sure. But you're saying two things.
I hope you're enjoying this.
No, I am enjoying this. I just also realized that this is a little self-indulgent, that I was really curious about this thing that's a little off topic.
I hope it's clarifying you, not confusing me. So.
Okay, well, here's the part that I do still unfortunately find a little bit confusing. So you're saying two things about this that I don't see how they fit together. One of them is that it would be objectively, morally good for us to live flourishing lives, whether God existed or not. And then the other is that God grants us these rights in the sense that, the reason why, that God somehow is the reason why I'm morally these are good, these are things that we should have a right
Yes.
to.
Yes, both of those things. So if there's someone right now in some country, island country,
Sigma male.
Yeah.
and they independently come to the conclusion in the natural law that they should marry and have children, not murder and not kill, regardless of them becoming in contact with the Word of God or where that came from, they're going to live flourishing lives. So that's what we mean by the natural law.
Sure, no,
that someone in Papua New Guinea or in Paris will equally
succeed if they do these. Sure, I understand, but
he's ripping the mic out. Oh my God.
Sure, but, no, but like what you're talking about seems like, forgive me if this is a slightly pretentious way to put it, but like it seems like what you're talking about isn't really metaphysics. In other words, what makes something true. Right, what you're talking about is really epistemology, how we find out that it's true.
So I'm happy to go into the metaphysics of it too.
Sure, but the question is just like,
Ben breaking out the formal philosophy now. Oh boy.
God granting us these rights is what makes it morally good for us to have these rights, then it can still be morally good for people to have these rights even if they don't know about that, right? I understand that part.
Okay,
but they have
good.
But that's a little bit of a different question from if it objectively weren't true.
We're not true.
If it were objectively not true
that God exists,
would it still be the case that these would be morally good?
Got it. I understand the question. I reject the premise.
Well, I mean, I understand.
because like it's like
I
asking.
Understand you think that's not the case.
It's asking in like a hypothetical world if like there is no unmoved mover and like some creator.
Sure.
So I guess what you're saying is what I value as the natural law. If there was no natural lawgiver, would the natural law still be true? To be consistent, I guess.
Okay.
Yes.
Well.
But I reject the premise because you're.
But
asking,
that's weird then, because now you're saying morality doesn't come from God then, because it exists independent of God, right? This is why is it Euthyphro? I don't know how to pronounce the guy's name because I didn't take any fucking class on this. We could go over the dilemma. I mean, I think it's pretty interesting if you're a God person because Euthyphro. Has this guy asked, what if two people who claim to find... Oh, no, that's you're in a different type of argument there. Basically, the question is whether the good and just is good and just because God wills it, or whether God wills it because it is good and just. Ever since Plato's original discussion, the question has presented a problem for some theists, though others have thought it a false dilemma. It continues to be an object of theological and philosophical discussion today. It's an interesting dilemma, but
me to believe something.
Well, I'm not asking you to believe.
Or to entertain something.
Sure.
So to answer your question, I guess, would the natural law be true if God did not write the natural law? Yeah.
Okay. So.
But I think that the natural law is true because it's epistemologically correct, teleologically correct in our purpose and our driven, theologically correct and spiritually correct.
Euthyphro.
Okay, but that still seems like we've traveled some
right.
distance from saying that God gave us these rights in the sense that the reason it's morally good that we have these rights is that God.
Euthyphro.
But and I believe that is true.
Okay.
Because our existence is breathed into by a creator.
Sure, but I think you can think three things are all true. One is that the reason we exist is because of God. Right?
Yes.
And you could even think that the reason maybe there are certain natural facts about the way that people are such that certain things are good for us and help us live flourishing lives, and that the reason for those natural facts is that God created it that way. You can believe those two things while also believing that
we'll go to the next. Let's go, baby.
Good that we do these things and live flourishing lives.
Is both. Yeah, and I said that.
Well, okay, but I don't understand how it could be both.
It's both because God commanded it, and because God created it and God ordained it, and also that it's good for human existence through the moral construct that we all accept.
So if God...
They're both simultaneously true.
So, I mean, maybe this is another thing where I'm asking you to entertain something you don't want to entertain, but like...
If God was dead?
No, if God had commanded something different, would that thing therefore be good?
Yes, that's the question.
It's a premise and a presupposition that.
Well, I understand you don't think
it's like saying actually the Bible deals with this, right?
Sure,
so the Bible deals with this in the story of Abraham and Isaac, or is it Isaac and Jacob when he brings up his son to sacrifice?
Abraham and Isaac.
Abraham and Isaac, where God commanded Abraham to sacrifice his child.
Come on, Charlie, I'm the atheist.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to make sure I was precise. When God actually never commanded him to do that. It was a test of his faith, right? At the very moment he delivered a replacement sacrifice at the very last moment.
So this is a perfect example.
That's a question of obedience to God. Do you do something that is against the moral law if God commands you to do it?
So you think that if, hypothetically, God had wanted him to go through with it, that the right thing to do would be to go through with it?
Yeah, if you believe in an omniscient, omnipotent, unmoved mover, but this text doesn't show that. Yes, I mean, the answer even for an atheist would be a yes. If you believe there was a God,
I don't think that follows. I think that you could be, if there was a omniscient and omnipotent but morally bad reason, being that created the universe, then I would have a self.
I think that's a fair thing to say.
I would have a self-interested reason to go along with it, the same way that if I was living under Stalin, I would have a self-interested reason to go along with what Stalin wanted. But that wouldn't mean I would have a moral reason.
But
I think one of the shoot-offs of this. And I haven't like dove in deep into this dilemma because I'm not theistic, so fuck this. But I think one of the shoot-offs of this as well is that like, let's say that the natural law exists independent of God and God only like reveals it to you rather than commands it. He's revealing to the natural law. Theoretically, couldn't there be other gods as well that could reveal that same law to you? Why do you need one monotheistic God to do it? Could another one not do the same, right?
Under the Christian text and the Bible, there is not a commandment that is against what we would consider as moral in the Western tradition. And you would probably totally disagree. Let me ask you a question about Christopher Hitchens.
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, because we got 5 minutes left.
Sure.
I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
I am delighted to do 5 minutes of Hitchens.
Help me give the best argument, because what are your metaphysics? Are you an atheist?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you hope you're wrong?
Do I hope I'm wrong? I hope. It depends on what that would mean. I mean,
do you hope there's a God?
I certainly don't hope there's a God who's going to send me to hell for being an atheist. That wouldn't be a good outcome.
Do you want eternal life?
Do I? Depends what kind of eternal life. If
like eternal bliss.
Eternal bliss, if that were
seeing your loved ones.
Sure. If that were on offer, I would take it.
I respect that answer, because not every atheist answers that way. Some atheists say no.
I would. There are a lot.
They want to be right more than what is good.
Sure. They would. There are a lot of things about that, like standard theologically Orthodox Christians believe is God, about God I would not be happy to be true, but that one I would definitely be happy to have.
Okay, an acceptance of a Savior that could give you eternal life. So the fine-tuning argument.
I don't think that's exactly what I said, but it's probably not worth doing. The fine-tuning argument.
Fine-tuning, which is Christopher Hitchens said is the best argument for those people that believe in it.
Fine-tuning argument is garbage. Imagine if, Charlie, if God were to command you that the most moral thing would be to take a dick in the ass, would you acknowledge then that taking dicks in the ass is good? That's the real hypothetical you gotta get him with. You gotta hit him with the hard ones.
Creator. The fine-tuning argument is that we live in a planet that's perfectly positioned.
He's about to explain it, sorry.
You could do better than I could. How do you personally wrestle with and unpack the fine-tuning?
The fine-tuning argument is just, the premise is just so stupid because you're assuming. The fine-tuning argument is like looking at a computer program and like saying like, oh my God, how was it the case that like you were able to get all of this to compile in this compiler, like in this language perfectly, like with just like a whole bunch of shit, like like you have to write like code in a specific way to do it, blah, 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 blah. So there must have been a creator. But the problem with the using code isn't a really great example, I guess. Okay, let me back up. Let's try something different. Or I'll just be more general. I don't need to give an example. You should be able to understand this, right? People look at the Earth and they say, oh my God, like life has been fine-tuned to live on Earth. And they say that that's like a guided process. But the problem is, Earth could have been a certain way and then life developed to like grow into Earth, if that makes sense, right? Like if you take a glass and you fill it with water, it's not like we've picked the perfect amount of water to fill the glass. It's that you pour water into the glass and it'll take the shape of the glass because that's all it can do, right? It could be that the Earth is 1,000,000 kilometers closer or farther away, or however long would be a distance. I don't know what the AU is. I don't know what the number for that is. But like it could be that the Earth is closer and farther. Life could have developed a certain way. Like to assume that life could have only gone a certain way is just not, that's like an invalid assumption. There could be other things, right? Yeah, sorry, Jesus.
Tuning argument.
Sure.
Do you ever have doubts that there is a God?
Honestly, I kind of wish that I could say yes, because it makes me sound more,
reasonable.
More reasonable. It sounds dogmatic if I say no, but honestly, I think no is the honest answer. I think that so why the fine-tuning argument doesn't move me very much.
Because it didn't move Hitchens, but it
piqued
his curiosity.
I mean, I might even go along with the comparative claim that it might be better than the other arguments, but they have but the reason that I find the fine-tuning argument unconvincing is that I don't think we can move backwards from it would be really improbable, like given a certain setup, this outcome would be really improbable. This outcome happened, therefore that setup is wrong. So just a small example that I think makes vivid why I don't find that plausible. If you shuffle a deck of 52 cards and you deal out the ace of spades, it's clearly a bad argument to say, well, if the person was cheating.
Yeah, the deck has more than 52 cards, though.
They were doing, sure.
Because the probability, the fine-tuning
But I think the point of principle is that the same reason why it would be unreasonable to say, well, there's only a 1 in 52 chance that a fair shuffle would have gotten me this, and this happened, therefore it wasn't a fair shuffle, is that you could run that argument for any card. That it would be much more likely that if you had the dealer was cheating to give you the 3 of hearts, you get the 3 of hearts, than if it was random. And I think that no matter how big you make the deck, the same point is going to apply, that if it's 1 out of, 500 trillion or whatever, that the chance of this, well, sure, it's the fact that this outcome is the one that happens, you could say would be more likely if there was a being who wanted it to happen, but you could also say the same thing about all but one of the other 500 trillion.
There's got to be a better way to explain it. I'm trying to think, because my explanation sucked too. His explanation was good, but I'm just trying to think if it makes sense. Like, things could be another way. If I shuffle a deck of cards and then I show you the whole deck, that's probably the first time in history that that particular arrangement of cards has been seen. That's the most likely thing. No one has ever shuffled a deck of cards and has seen the same arrangement of cards. And to say that, like, well, since that happened, it must have been naturally selected for. It's like, well, hold on. I could have shuffled it and anything else could have happened, right? It could have gone another way. You just don't know that. You just assume that it could only be one way because that's the universe you live in,
Let me ask you a question, like the minute, 10 seconds we have remaining, which is not that. Teleological argument, what's the purpose of life?
So I think that I definitely cannot do in 10 seconds, but if I could have like an extra 45 or so, I could take a run at it.
What is the purpose? What is the telos? What is the place you're aiming for?
So I think the teleological argument for the existence of God is a slightly different thing.
No, I'm just saying, what is your teleology? What's the purpose of being?
Okay, all right. Because you said teleological argument, we could get into why I don't think that works. But I think that the purpose of being, if you mean the moral purpose, what makes it like morally good to live life in a certain way. We could certainly talk about what counts as personal virtue. We could certainly talk about what counts as moral justice. I think a good, thriving life is one where you can pursue what you regard as a good and fulfilling life, which I gotta say, I think you're enabled to do if you have the kind of economic supports that make you not stay in jobs you hate, etc. I cannot resist throwing that in.
That's okay. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, me
Maybe
too.
we could do it again.
I'd love to.
It was fun to explore ideas everywhere from metaphysics to ethics to post office adoration. Is that fair to say? Defense.
Yes, strong.
We agreed on Hunter
Biden,
Jeff Bezos, price transparency, and pharmaceutical commercials. Besides that, it's a bunch of really good disagreements, but we have clarity and not agreement, which I hope we have more.
I wish they could have gone deeper. Ben was super duper ultra prepared for this conversation. He either knew all the topics in advance or he just did a really good job at making sure he was ready for every thing that was going to come up. So good job on Ben. As much as I hate him, he did a really good job on this conversation.